The Long War. 10,000 years have passed since the galaxy burned in the fires of the Horus heresy. 10 millennia since the gods of chaos corrupted the greatest of the Primarchs, Warmaster Horus Lupercal, and turned him against the Imperium of Man. Fully half of his brother Primarchs rebelled along with Horus, their actions plunging the Emperor's realm into the most destructive civil war humanity has ever seen. Much of that dark time has been lost beneath the dust of eons, or else blurred into allegory and myth. Yet one sure fact remains. In the last days of mankind's greatest war, Horus led his traitor legions to Terra, and there they laid siege to the Emperor's palace. The siege was a battle that shattered mountain ranges and blackened continents. Traitor starships rained ordnance down upon the cradle of humanity until tectonic plates buckled and cracked. The armies of Titan god machines dueled amidst the blazing ruins of vast and wondrous cities, while thousands upon thousands of turncoat space marines flung themselves at the palace walls. Just as all seemed lost, the Emperor led a daring attack upon Horus's battle barge that saw the two gods of war engage in the final duel to the death. The Emperor triumphed, though his victory left his body broken and consigned him forever to the life-sustaining edifice known as the Golden Throne. The Imperium lay in ruins, the dream of galactic utopia, ashes in the void. If the ruin wrought upon the Imperium seemed terrible, the fate of the traitors was worse. Horus had gambled all in his assault on Terra, and had failed. Their legions shattered and the Warmaster slain, the traitors fled across the galaxy with their vengeful kinsmen at their heels. They took refuge in the swirling warp rift known as the Eye of Terror. Within that twisted realm, the traitors fell upon one another. They broke into ravaging warbands and fought for the favor of the Chaos Gods, degenerating further into mutation and madness. Their raiding parties still burst from the Eye to engage in piracy and violence against the Imperium of Man, but as a coherent force, their strength was spent. Yet, there were those who continued to fight the Long War in earnest, who never lost sight of the true goal: to see the Imperium of Man in ruins and the Emperor slain. Greatest amongst these was Abaddon the Despoiler, Horus's successor and greatest living heir. Abaddon took the title of Warmaster for himself and vowed to succeed where his gene father had failed. He has spent the last 10,000 years fighting to make his vow a reality. Abaddon has led 12 Black Crusades against the galaxy, eliminating threats and claiming powerful weapons in a scheme so long as to defy mortal comprehension. At last, he is ready. And as the 13th Black Crusade breaks against the Cadian Gate, the fate of the whole Imperium, and with it the galaxy, hangs in the balance. Chapter 1. The Slaughter Begins. At the head of a vast armada of traitors, madmen and mutants, Abaddon the Despoiler began his greatest ever attack upon the Imperium. Even as traitor armies fell upon the stalwart defenders of the Cadian Gate, other heretic warbands were on the move. These invasion fleets struck at neighboring systems, their missions crucial to the success of the Despoiler's grand plan. One such renegade offensive aimed straight for the Diamor system. Amid the darkness of the void, reality tore open like a wound. The split grew quickly wider, filthy warp stuff vomiting from it like ectoplasm from a psyker's gullet. Out of the yawning rent came a blade-like prow, the height of a cliff face. It was followed by the surging mass of the battleship Red Honor, flagship of the Crimson Slaughter Warfleet. More Baroque warships came in its wake, miles-long hulls encrusted with leering gargoyles and spiked chaos symbols. A large fleet of ships cleared the translation point, and the warp rift snapped shut behind them. Throughout the fleet, empiric shutters jolted, then rose slowly into their recesses. Gun decks were unshrouded, lance batteries were powered up. Local space crackled with the prying sensor waves of high-gain Auspex sweeps. The Crimson Slaughter had come to the Diamore system, and they were ready for war. On board the cathedral-sized bridge of the Red Honor, Cranon the Relentless prowled his command gallery like a caged predator. Half of his mind was intent upon the twisted things that crewed his warship's biomechanical consoles. The other half was battling against the screams and muttering voices that echoed throughout his mind. Cranon's breathing rasped through his respirator grill in angry snarls as he tried to fight the voices down. "They're loud today, my lord." Cranon's head snapped round as combat stims momentarily flooded his system. Occupied by the voices, he had not heard Drasnicht, a champion of his chosen, approach. "As you say," he growled in response. "They sense bloodshed is in the offing." Drasnicht gripped the rail of the command gallery beside Cranon, his gaze directed towards the image of the planet filling the main screens. His third eye, in the center of his forehead, remained closed. Cranon followed his gaze. Amthal. The planet was vast and verdant, but for the scars of recent industry that marred its surface. "Have you foreseen anything of this place, Drasnicht?" asked Cranon. "Any prophecy of what lies ahead?" The Chosen raised a hand towards his forehead. An unconscious gesture, he halted part way. "Hints," he admitted. "Quick flashes, but strange. And they brought pain and clamour with them like I have never known." Cranon digested this response for a moment, watching his bridge crew labouring at their tasks. They would be establishing Vox links with the other ships of his fleet, sweeping for localised threats and ensuring his craft had sustained no serious damage during its passage through the Sea of Souls. "Do you believe that on Amthal we will find a cure for the voices, as Zorphus claims?" Drasnicht gave a mirthless bark of laughter. "Ha! Always they seek to lead us by that leash, eh? But no, my lord. I have seen no evidence to support the claims of the Black Legion's sorcerer lord. There is something down there, something of incredible power. That much I have foreseen clearly in the flashes." Cranon nodded, as though he had expected nothing else. "No doubt. Something that the great Abaddon himself desires. Something the Black Legion needs. We will be the first to attack. Such an honor." On the surface of Amthal, amidst dark forests and glassy plains, the Adeptus Mechanicus were at work. On the orders of techno-archaeologist Dominus Ivasnophon, multiple dig sites had been torn into the planet's hide. Excavator engines had ripped out thousands of tons of soil and stone to create vast dark pits. Around these, the servitor work maniples from Forge World Metallica had erected perfectly ordered complexes of manufactorums, cogitator shrines, generator blocks, and miles after miles of fabricated defenses, with blackened kill zones scorched out on all sides. No other force in the Imperium could have established fortified enclaves with such speed and efficiency. As he stood amidst his maniple on the western barricades of the dig site, Beta Secundus, the sheer industry of the spectacle filled Vanguard Alpha Dominus Rho with pride, or as close an approximation as he was capable of feeling. As to what Magos Evastophon sought beneath the surface of Amthal, Decimus Rho had no idea. It was not the place of so lowly a creature as he to comprehend such truths. It mattered only that he did his duty. For in error-free accomplishment of one's allotted tasks lay the true service of the Omnissiah. Admittedly, these tasks had been made more difficult by the adverse conditions. Decimus Rho had seen multiple Scitarii and servitors falling prey to sub-routine corruption and illogical, destructive behavior that had necessitated their liquidation. If he was honest with himself, and he was incapable of being anything else. Even Decimus Rowe had felt the unnatural energies of this world, heard the Susurrus have whispering voices in the dark watches of the night. Another matter he was unworthy to consider. His duty was more immediate, more tangible. 23.27 minutes ago, enemy forces had been detected approaching the orbital envelope of Amthal in great strength. Decimus Rowe knew satisfaction once again. War was soon to be waged, and that was a task that the Alpha was not only worthy of, but born to fulfill. Scorn dripped from Crannon's words. The Crimson Slaughter were haunted by spirits that drove them half mad. They had bent the knee to Abaddon and his Black Legion, and sworn themselves as his attack dogs. None of that made them weaklings or fools, regardless of what Zorphus, this invasion's ultimate master, clearly thought. Dwelling on it did no good, however, and Crannon changed the subject with a curt gesture to one of his senior deck crew. "You. Have the Black Legion done as they said they would?" The hunchbacked menial bowed low, keeping his eyes on the deck as he spoke. "They have, my lord. The warp-touched confirmed. The Black Legion ships are engaged over Peridos. They have drawn off much of the system's fleet." "And Ireline?" "Taken, great lord. Seized by the Black Legion. The dark factories labour, and the warding towers hold." "Then Zorphus has done that much right at least," rumbled Crannon. "The way is open." "Shall I signal readiness, lord?" asked Dasnicht, a note of eagerness creeping into his voice. Crannon swept back his cloak and placed one gauntleted hand upon the pommel of his blade. "Do it," he ordered. "This world will be butchered, and we shall cleanse our souls in its blood. No delays. The attack begins at once." Less than an hour after Crannon's order to attack, the battleships and cruisers of the Crimson Slaughter swept down upon Amthal. They did not do so unopposed. Bulky fleet mechanicus ships lit archive drives and surged into battle. Neutron lances and vast galvanic batteries hurled devastation at the Crimson Slaughter's warships, causing void shields to shudder and collapse. Aboard the escort cruiser Iron Wasp, hundreds of traitors were burned to ash as a volley of servitor-guided plasma torpedoes slammed through the ship's hull and flooded the bridge and deck crews with molten death. Elsewhere, the heavy transport Hellbound shuddered under multiple volleys of radium shells. Its captain was forced to seal screaming masses of gunslaves behind emergency bulkheads to prevent his entire ship from becoming an irradiated tomb. The Crimson Slaughter ships ploughed on regardless, the gun decks thundering and their lance batteries stabbing shot after shot into their foes. Within the minds of every renegade space marine, babbling voices screeched and cajoled, threatened and mocked. The cacophony only added to the traitors' resolve, for in bloodshed they would find their release. Seated in the command throne of the monstrous battleship Scimitar, Vorlak the Sly secured his own blood peace with every shot his gun crews fired. The greatest shipmaster of the Crimson Slaughter, Vorlak commanded with effortless ease, predicting the moves of his cumbersome foes long before they made them. "Helm!" barked Vorlak, his burning red eyes locked upon the forward view screens. "Hard to port! Roll 13!" His vast warship reacted with gratifying speed, tilting in the void and causing an incoming volley of torpedoes to streak harmlessly by. "Gunnery status!" demanded the shipmaster. The hulking, flesh-metal creature that filled the nearest ordnance pit bubbled and squirmed as it responded. "Chambers full and clear for firing, Lord. Lances charged and ready." "Good," purred Vorlak, as he saw an Explorator warship filling his screens. "Prow lances! Target that wallowing sow's engines!" The view screens washed out for a moment, with purple radiance as the Scimitar's lance batteries let fly. The gunnery thing was inhumanly accurate, its shots placed perfectly. Fire billowed silently in the void as the enemy ship's engines detonated, sending the bulky craft yawning slowly out of control. Volak gripped his throne's armrests with taloned fingers, scratching fresh grooves into the worn brass as he felt the pleasure of imminent victory. He bared vicious fangs in a predatory grin, visualizing his vessel as a monstrous predator ripping its way through herds of dull prey beasts. "Helm! Hard starboard and match velocity! Bring us alongside the prey!" As his crew scurried to obey his commands, the shipmaster spared a glance at the Auspex runes. Hellbound and Deathbringer were both taking fire, but nothing that heavy transports like those couldn't handle. The cruisers were moving to intercept. Lord Crannon would get his planetfall in full force. Not that Vorlak cared. He was a predator of the void. Leave the dirt grubbing to lesser warriors, for he had bigger game in his sights. Vorlak felt the scimitar buck under him, shuddering with the force of multiple impacts. "Report!" he snarled. "Range shots from Sector 173, Lord," responded the albino mutant at the damage control console. "Lucky hits. Shields holding. No damage to hull or systems." "Mark the craft that fired upon us," ordered Vorlak angrily. "Their impudence has earned them the horror of my wrath. For now, continue attack run. Kill one target before engaging the next. One of the oldest tenets of warfare, one that even the gibbering voices at the back of Vorlak's mind could not drive out. Besides, it was a matter of pride to the shipmaster. Once he had marked his prey, they did not escape. Engines bellowing, shields flickering with repeated impacts, the scimitar drew alongside its wounded victim. The fleet mechanicus ship was tumbling slowly off its axis, falling gracelessly through the void, with no way of arresting its helpless momentum. On Vorlak's orders, the scimitar fired thrusters and came abreast of it, lining up primed gun decks at point-blank range. Vorlak let the moment stretch long, savouring the seconds before the bloodletting. His wet, serpentine tongue flickered between his parted fangs, and then he uttered a single order. "Kill it!" Every weapon on the scimitar's port side opened up at once, hammering down the void shields that protected the wounded explorator and spreading rippling blasts along its flank. Again and again the gun decks spoke until, riven with the flash and flicker of internal explosions, the explorator came violently apart. Even as the luckless battleship suffered in its death throes, the Crimson Slaughter combat drop began. Dark specks raining down on Amthal amidst the plummeting wreckage of its defense craft. Vorlak and his fellow captains had done their work well. Now, it fell to Crannon and his renegade warriors to continue the slaughter upon the planet below. The attack by the Crimson Slaughter was the first of several waves planned to fall upon Amthal. A sizable fleet of Black Legion warships lurked in the void between the inner planets of the Diamor system, but on the orders of Lord Zorphas, they held back. Crannon the Relentless cared not. He intended to take this world with his own hands and prove that his warriors were the greatest amongst the Chaos ranks, while also quieting the voices that haunted them with the blood of the slain. Crannon's boots rang against the ramp of his lander as he stormed out into a firefight. Radium bullets sizzled past his head, punching one of the Ravagers off his feet as he followed his lord down the ramp. Crannon ignored his follower's death. At that moment, Crimson Slaughter forces were executing drop assaults all across Amthal, hitting the primary excavation sites of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Crannon had designated each of these sites a war zone and named them for the horrors his followers would inflict there. His was the aptly named Warzone Carnage. "Attack!" bellowed Crannon, his voice amplified to a thunderous roar by the vox grill of his horned helm. "Close the gap! Cut them down like the chaff they are!" Spilling from dropcraft and dread-clawed pods around him, Crannon's warriors answered his words with bloodthirsty roars. Chaos Space Marines and chanting cultists surged to attack. Warzone Carnage was bordered to its east by an untouched expanse of forest, which Crannon's warriors used to cover their initial deployment. They burst from the forest's eaves into the blackened kill zone beyond, and right into the gunfire of the Metallican Scitarii. Before Crannan stretched a wasteland of drifted ash, scorched tree stumps, and bare rock that his helm display told him was precisely 2 miles wide. Beyond it lay the dark bulk of the Adeptus Mechanicus bunkers and barricades, with larger structures crowding behind them that belched smoke into the skies. The Metallicans were keeping their big guns back, bombarding the invaders from a distance, but maniples of Scitarii were advancing across no man's land towards Crannan's warriors, raining fire into their ranks in an attempt to wipe them out. That was their mistake, thought the Chaos Lord. "Kill for silence!" he roared, breaking into a run. Drasnicht and his ravagers followed, charging forwards through the pummeling fire of the Adeptus Mechanicus. To Crannan's right, Lakdar's Chaos Terminators strode through the enemy barrage, spraying shots at their cyborg foes. To his left, a pack of demon engines was rampaging through the Scitarii, who had advanced into range. In Crannan's mind, the voices that haunted him bayed with bloodlust, drowning out the rasp of his breathing as he charged. His helm voice crackled, Drasnicht's strained voice breaking through the maelstrom in his mind. "The haunting breaks loose, Lord." "Use it," rasped Crannan. "Use the madness!" As one, the Crimson Slaughter braced themselves for the sudden onrush of the ghosts that tormented their bodies and minds. Helm displays roared with static, voxlinks filled with demented chatter and ominous whispers. Scitarii were dragged aloft by invisible hands, then rent apart like rag dolls. Insane laughter swirled upon a howling gale. Soldiers of the machine god blurted scrap code as ghosts infested their augmetics, which caught fire and ran in streams of molten metal. Others were compelled to open fire upon one another, their movements jerky and puppet-like. Seizing the moment, Crannan lunged forwards through the poltergeist madness and hacked his blade into the neck of his nearest foe. As the Scitarii crumpled, headless to the ground, Crannan felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had known. It was not the parasite clinging of the possessor spirits. This was something else, something exhilarating. The Chaos Lord hacked down another foe, glorying in the unbound energies of death. Gorath Hell listened with satisfaction to the reports spilling from the vox gargoyle of his private sanctum. The Crimson Slaughter were pushing in towards their objectives. The word-bearer leaned over the font of communion, black eyes reflected in the thick blood within it. "Lord Zorphus, hear me." For a moment, the surface of the blood pool shuddered with the engine tremor of the word-bearer's ship. Then a change came over it, the liquid spiraling lazily as though vanishing down some impossible whirlpool. Gorath Hell's breath clouded in a sudden rush of cold air. "Speak, Dark Apostle, and tell me good news." The voice was rich and commanding, drifting up from the whirlpool of gore. "Lord Zorphus, Octed's blessings on you. The cursed ones have descended with fire in their hearts. They suspect not that—" "I said speak," interrupted the voice with a note of irritation. "Not sermonize. Make it brief, priest. I've a war to orchestrate." The Dark Apostle bristled, fighting down the anger that surged at such an unaccustomed snub. "The Crimson Slaughter have landed, Lord," he bit out, "and are advancing upon their designated war zones." "Better," replied the echoing voice, its tone laced with menace. "Now, get down there and watch for the signs. Find me the cage, Gorathel. The despoiler expects." With that, the pool stilled. Face set in fury at his curt dismissal, Gorathel straightened and bellowed for his war gear. His cultist attendants scurried to obey, terrified by their master's anger. Not one of them would have switched places with the Imperial soldiers who were about to face his wrath, not for all the rewards the gods could send. Amthal Incarnate. While Crannan and his warriors battled across warzone carnage, the Crimson Slaughter planetary assault gathered pace. From the tangled forests of the northern plateaus to the southern grass seas, The servants of chaos sank their fangs into Amthal. Around the Metallican excavation sites, savage fighting had erupted as the Crimson Slaughter pressed forwards across well-prepared kill zones. Larger traitor war engines were beginning to land in support. Super-heavy demon engines and lumbering titans disembarked to add their fire to the fight. Across Amthal, the fires of war raged higher by the hour. Darkness clung to the battlefield like a shroud. Every few moments, the pall was torn back by the bright flare of gunfire, the crawling electrostatic blasts, or the strobing muzzle flash of bolt gunfire. Crannon's auto-sensors filtered the glare and overlaid his vision with thermal wireframes, allowing him to see perfectly, despite the gloom. With their cybernetically enhanced senses, the warriors of the Adeptus Mechanicus had no more trouble than he in that regard. As it had been for the last few hours, their fire was still deadly accurate. Kharn broke from behind the blackened hulk of a spike-studded rhino. He dashed headlong across no man's land with whipping, crackling fire chasing his heels, and threw himself into the cover of a plasma-vitrified crater. His warriors were doing the same all around him, forced into cautious, stuttering advances by the constant hail of lethal Cicatrix firepower. They were moving forwards, but slowly. Crannon's glorious assault had turned into a grinding crawl across the kill zone, and he was not happy about it. "Drasnicht," he growled into his helm box. "What word on the Titans?" "Still landing, Lord." The champion's voice crackled back from his position somewhere to the north. "They will not reach this position for hours." Krannon swore. Away to the south, he heard a mechanical bellow, and the hiss of a multi-melter rolled across the battlefield. Something large exploded, eliciting another roar. The deranged hellbrute Hakorath was still wreaking havoc, but without a concerted push, the Crimson Slaughter would never break through in sufficient strength to secure the war zone. Krannon gritted his teeth as his ghost cackled and mocked. Yet suddenly, as though a switch had been thrown, they fell ominously silent. In their place, Krannon heard something whispering in his ear, different to the usual mocking, spiteful voices. The Chaos Lord was reminded of the strange surge of power he had felt when slaughtering the Cicatrix earlier that day. What was going on? "What are you?" growled Krannon. "What do you want?" "Lord?" came Drasnicht's confused reply, but Krannon ignored his subordinate. He could almost make out the words, louder now, more insistent. We are Amthal. We are Amthal. We're in darkness. We want the light. Give us the light." Krannon felt again that surging power rising through his body, tingling along his nerves like an electrical current, causing his fingers to twitch. The whispers grew louder as the energy flooded through him. "We are Amthal. We see you. We see you all. We are Amthal. We want the light. You will give us the light." "Lord?" came Drasnicht's voice over the vox, mingled with those of Krannon's other squad leaders. "What is this? This power? What?" Then all was drowned out by the roar of blood in Krannon's ears, the hammering of his twin hearts and the rising chorus of hatred in his mind. He was Krannon, yet he was Amthal. He was the trapped, yet also the angel of liberation. He was death, twice wrought and starving for blood. With an amplified roar, Krannon surged up from the crater and charged for the Adeptus Mechanicus barricades. Lethal firepower rained down upon him, only to flicker and flash into nothingness against the bulk of energy that now wreathed his body. Up and down the lines, Krannon was dimly aware of the same scene being repeated. The Crimson Slaughter burning with mysterious power and charging heedless through the Metallican's fire. Decimus Rose steadied his aim and rattled off another tight burst of radiant bullets from his carbine. The darkness was no hindrance to his accuracy, and he felt a spike of satisfaction as his shots cut the legs out from beneath a charging Chaos occultist. Around him, the scutarii of his maniple were firing their own volleys into the gloom, firing patterns overlapping perfectly to keep their section of the line clear of foes. The mounds of traitor corpses beyond the barricade spoke well of that efficiency, while the inviolate condition of the forged temples at Decimus Row's back was further cause for satisfaction. Hub Beta Secundus continued to operate at 92% efficiency despite the sustained enemy assault. The data spilling through Decimus Row's neural processors indicated that the Archaeotech dig was proceeding uninterrupted. Praise the Omnissiah, he thought, his wheezing lung bellows puffing with pride. The heretics and their false gods were no match for the might of the galaxy's only true and logical deity. Strange energy spikes suddenly registered upon the Vanguard Alpha's sensorium. Red hazard warnings rimmed his vision for a moment, and several of his comrades let out bursts of coded consternation. Out amid the kill zone, the crimson slaughter rose from behind their wrecked tanks and crater edges with strident roars of rage. Calmly, Decimus Row sighted on the nearest enemy and slammed a tight group of shots into its chest. Error code wound along his cortex spools as the target kept coming, a rippling corona of green flame dancing around it. Decimus Row fired again and again. A frown creased the red-blackened flesh of his brow as his target refused to die. Then the Chaos Space Marine was over the barricade, clearing it in a single bound and punching the head from Vanguard Praetor Aleph. Decimus Row could not panic, but he knew with sinking certainty that some variable had been altered, and that his warriors could no longer win this fight. With a single binary blurt, the Alpha ordered his squad to fall back. Ahead, one of the Adeptus Mechanicus's walking tanks stalked from between two armor-clad bunkers and leveled its weapons. Crannan laughed with mad exhilaration as he threw himself forwards, rolling beneath the searing cut of a neutron laser, and then came back to his feet at the vehicle's side. Strength burning through his limbs, the Chaos Lord grabbed the tank's nearest leg and pulled with all of his might. As he did so, he pivoted on his heel. Impossibly, the dune crawler left the ground and swung like a wrecking ball into the side of the nearest bunker. Sparks and flame rained down as the walking tank was smashed to ruin, hammering deep cracks into the bunker's flank in the process. Crannan hurled the broken wreck aside with a grunt, then raised one hand and felt incredible energy surge along his limb. A bolt of roiling force burst from his palm and smashed into the damaged bunker wall, imploding it in a shower of razored shrapnel. Desultory fire spat from within the sundered bunker, but Crannan waded through it without a second thought. What was that incredible power, he wondered, that had seized him and his warriors so completely? It was not their possessor spirits, of that he was sure. This was so much more ancient, so much more mighty. This was the power of Amthal, and it would be free. The high ceiling of the Omnissiah's shrine was formed of intricately meshed cogs, pistons, and gears. To the untrained eye, it would appear as a churning mass of machinery. To techno-archaeologist Dominus Evosnophon, its artifice was perfect, its depiction of the Omnissiah's glory faultless. The machine god was found, even the smallest details, reflected Evosnophon. A comparison could only be drawn with the Magos's prize upon Amthal, its complexity a thing of beauty. As he stood and cogitated amid the hiss and rumble of the shrine, Evosnophon flattered himself that what he sought there might prove one of the greatest offerings to the machine god since the days of Arkan Land. The Magos was a seeker of ancient technologies, gazing deep into the workings of the galaxy and teasing forth those secrets that furthered the might of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Such treasures he laid upon the altar of the machine god, and in doing so, hoped to replicate their magnificence. Understanding was neither sought nor desired, for many of the timeless mechanisms that Evosnophon uncovered were Xenos in nature, or so old as to have been corrupted by the touch of old night. But to harness the power of sacred Archaeotech, to claim that power for the Omnissiah and use it to drive back the alien, the mutant, and the heretic, That was holy work indeed, a calling that Evastophon had gladly devoted his life to. All that sacred work, the Magos's greatest offering, and all it could do for the realm of man, was in jeopardy. The worshippers of the dark gods had come, as Magos Evastophon had calculated they might. He had prepared for such an eventuality as best he could. The Magos's forces were significant, including many battle maniples of Scitarii, processions of the cult Mechanicus, knights of House Raven, and the towering god machines of Legio Metallica. Still, as Magos' projections showed, even such martial strength would not be enough. Balasteo tasking, rasped the Magos to one of his hovering Soho skulls, bear a repetition of my message to the astropathic hub every 7.3 minutes. Reiterate to the governor that the blood angels must make all speed. The servitor skull burbled a coded litany and hovered away to obey its master's instructions. Evastophon watched it go, then turned the lenses of his eyes up to the ceiling once again, looking for inspiration in its divine workings. The blood angels must hurry, he thought to himself with cold detachment, or they would find no one left alive to reinforce. Gorath Hell wove aside as the buzzing blade passed within an inch of his face. His lip curled with contempt. The Dark Apostle swung his tainted Crozius, slamming it into the breastplate of his gangling assailant. Energy discharged from the head of the weapon with a loud bang, crumpling the Ruststalker's torso and hurling its broken body away to bounce off a nearby tree trunk. "Thus do the curs of the Corpse Emperor find their end," sneered the word-bearer. "May they writhe in the hell-fires of the dark gods for time eternal." The Dark Apostle glanced around the clearing, making sure that there were no more spindle-limbed assassins creeping across the hilltop. The immediate threat was gone, though he could still hear the sporadic sounds of his warriors engaging the last of the Adeptus Mechanicus patrol in the woods beyond. Several word-bearers were down, heads severed or torsos carved apart by the vibrating blades of their attackers. That was no matter, thought Gorath Hell. The gods of chaos cared not for weaklings. More were wounded, but they would live or die upon their own merits. What mattered were the bound slave psychers, skeletal, eyeless wretches who shuddered in their bonds amidst the darkness. They were still huddled together on the ramp of the word-bearer's tainted Thunderhawk, unharmed, and shielded by Gorath Hall's hulking Chaos Terminator bodyguards. That was good, reflected the Dark Apostle. Their loss would have complicated matters. Gorath Hell pointed with his weapon, a corrupted badge of office, levelling the imperious gesture at the psychers. The slaves moaned and wept, sensing his pitiless regard. "Bring forth the sighted ones," Gorath Hell intoned, in a voice well used to ritual. "Let the eyeless see what even the blessed cannot." With a menacing whine of armoured servos, the Terminators marched forwards, forcing the psychers to run or be trampled. Dragging on the chain leashes around the witches' red raw throats, the word-bearers guided their slaves into position. The unfortunate wretches formed a loose ring, dotted around the bare hilltop above the tree line, surrounded by the burning forest below. Clad in rags and gaunt from malnutrition, the psychers shivered uncontrollably in the cold night winds. They moaned of voices whispering in their minds, and flinched back from where distant explosions lit the horizon to the north and south. "Hear me!" boomed Gorath Hell. He raised his tainted Crozius high and read aloud from a crumbling tome bound in onyx and blood. The words that spilled from his mouth squirmed through the air like living things. "Gainath er Shizel, Ixgather. You shall, in the name of the dark gods of chaos, with the blessings of the unholy Octade, whose power dwarfs all else. Look thee outwards with thine eyeless gaze, and speak of the cursed ones. Tell me what they have found upon this blighted world. Tell me, Zagashar Hukul." Goaded by the dark incantations, the slave psychers convulsed and wailed, froth spilling from their lips as their empty eye sockets burned with ghostly flames. Their backs arched, and their arms splayed wide as they threw back their heads and spoke as one. "The cursed ones fight. The cursed ones die. They war beneath the darkened sky." "How do they fare?" boomed Garthel, the howling wind whipping at the scrolls that adorned his armour. "What have they found?" "Death and blood and fire and hate," chorused the psychers, bodies writhing as ropes of stinking slime drooled from their open mouths. "Many die to find the gate." "The gate?" Gorathel's tone was tinged with excitement. "Where is the gate? What of the power on this world? What of the despoiler's prize?" The psychers shuddered and screamed, hateful voices spilling from them that were not their own. "Tell me!" thundered Gorathel. "Ysothorn, Zeksh! You shall! As one, the psychers' bodies burst into spectral flame, their flesh blackened and turning to ash. Yet amidst their screams, the demonic voices rose again, chanting out their answer. "Where Lord Accursed leads the fight, the imprisoned ones demand the light. The trap is weakest at the gate, there your master meets his fate." With that, the psychers' burning bodies exploded into clouds of ash that were snatched up by the howling wind and borne away into the dark night skies. The chains of their leashes clattered to the ground, smoke rising from scorched and twisted metal. Gorathel lowered his crozius and slowly closed the pages of his demonic tome. The book gave a satisfying thump as its pages met. He was silent for long moments, his face an unreadable mask. His followers held their places, well used to their master's wrath for those who acted out of turn. Gorathel spoke with the voices of the dark gods, and there were few indeed brave enough to court his ire. At last, the dark apostle's cruel features split into a twisted leer. He turned and stared out to the north, and dancing fires of distant battle reflected in his eyes. As he did so, he snapped his fingers at the nearest of his warriors. "You. Bring me the font of communion. Take that one." He pointed at a wounded word-bearer, who moaned and struggled as his brothers closed in. "Bleed him as the ritual demands. I need to speak to Lord Zorphus. The Crimson Slaughter have contacted the imprisoned. Just as the despoiler said, they have led us straight to the gate." Crannon's cursed host. Haunted by ghosts from the warp, the Crimson Slaughter are half-mad murderers who charge to battle surrounded by freakish poltergeist phenomena. Abaddon marked these renegades as exceptional terror troops, loosing them on the Imperium to spread horror and despair. Lord Zorphus had a different use for their warp-touched souls, however. The force that Crannon the Relentless led to the Diamor system represented a significant portion of his renegade warband's strength. Some of his followers, the sorcerer Severin Drask amongst them, were elsewhere, engaged in their own missions of terror and destruction. Each offensive was crucial to the despoiler's plans, but Crannon trusted no other with the battle for Amthal. The Chaos Lord had left others to guard the Space Hulk lost hope. He had worked too hard for too long to risk the future of his warband on a single endeavour, even if it was Abaddon himself giving the orders. For all this, Crannon's cursed host was a powerful force of hundreds of Chaos Space Marines supported by a sea of fanatical cultists. Renegade armour, wings of Helldrakes, packs of twisted demon engines, and even super-heavy war machines all waited in the holds of the Crimson Slaughter's heavy transports to support the attack upon Amthal. This potent army was divided across the planet's surface in a simple but effective deployment. Smaller forces, single squads of Crimson Slaughter Chaos Marines, or bands of zealous cultists, were assigned to secondary targets on the planet's surface, striking at communication relays, fuel depots, and the like. Crannon's main strength was split between the 5 Adeptus Mechanicus excavation sites. Each site was attacked by a sizable warband, led by one of Crannon's trusted lieutenants, and amply supported with armoured might. Crannon suspected the Black Legion were using his warriors as expendable shock troops, but he intended to turn their presumption back upon them. He and his warriors would teach their allies the mistake of underestimation when his fast and brutal assaults brought victory on Amthal. For his attack at Warzone Carnage, Crannon had selected his followers with brute force in mind. The Chaos Lord had little interest in subtlety, planning to put his enemies off balance and then simply ram his forces like a spear into their wavering guard. To that end, the Chaos Lord led a warband heavy in elite Crimson Slaughter warriors. The Chaos Chosen, known as the Ravagers, formed Crannon's personal honor guard, their gifted champion, Drasnicht, acting as his second-in-command. These hard-bitten killers had proven themselves to Crannon in battles from the strongholds of the Imperium to the demon worlds of the Eye of Terror, and he knew they would not fail him now. The Terminators of Lakdar's brethren added weight to the tip of Crannon's spear, their armoured resilience and firepower proving great assets during the headlong assault across the blackened Metallican kill zone. Crannon personally selected some of his finest Chaos Space Marine squads for the assault. Thanks to the attrition of ceaseless war, his warband no longer had the luxury of a fleet of armoured transports to fully mechanize their attacking forces. However, Crannon ensured that a scattering of these vehicles was available to his warriors at the war zone, providing them with greater speed and survivability. Chaos Space Marines and Ravening Possessed raced into battle alongside spearheads of battle tanks and loping packs of demon engines. The Cursed Host also made prodigious use of Crimson Slaughter Hellbrutes to support their attack. Crannon had great faith in the Berserk war engines, especially the long-lived Hakkarath, and so deployed a number of them to provide heavy fire support and brute strength to his army. The final components of Crannon's force were swift and deadly strike forces of Chaos Bikers and Raptors, alongside scattered bands of Chaos Cultists. It was these forces that would encircle the war zone's perimeter, striking targets of opportunity and forcing the enemy to spread their firepower, while Crannon's elite punched through to rip the heart from the enemy defences. Crannon the Relentless. Crannon the Relentless is the master of the former Crimson Sabres, and the dark antithesis of everything he once stood for. He is a twisted parody of the honour and nobility of the Adeptus Astartes, a being with all their strength and determination, but loyal only to his own selfish desires. Until their fall from grace, the Crimson Sabres were a loyal Space Marine chapter. Their only fault was an excessive determination to prove their spiritual strength and uncompromising detestation of chaos. But it is the nature of the Dark Gods to prevent such strong ideals, and when the Sabres' purge of the cults of Eumidia was twisted by demons into a genocidal massacre, the chapter's damnation was inevitable. Crannon and his warriors found themselves haunted by strange entities that manifested poltergeist phenomena even as they tore away at the Space Marine's sanity with the cacophonous screaming of those that they had slain. The Crimson Sabres degenerated into bloodthirsty madness, discovering that only through wholesale butchery could they quiet the voices for a time. The chapter, now renegade warband calling itself the Crimson Slaughter, might have shattered altogether but for the determination of Crannon the Relentless. A skilled leader, an exceptional warrior for all his faults, Crannon fought furiously not only to hold his followers together, but to rebuild their strength. Too proud was Crannon to accept failure, the Chaos Lord pushing his warriors harder than ever to fight and to survive. His quest had been so successful that Crannon has come to the attention of the despoiler himself. Now the Crimson Slaughter fight at the forefront of Abaddon's Great War, Crannon leading them in devastating terror raids to shatter Imperial morale and spread panic throughout the Emperor's realm. The Diamor Invasion. Lord Zorphus's attack on the Diamor system was planned as a devastating sequence of cunning feints, each building towards a dark goal. In the opening stages of the invasion, savage space battles erupted across the system as the Imperial defenders attempt to fight back, never realizing that they were being led away from the traitor's true prize. The Chaos attack upon the Diamor system commenced with a series of sudden, vicious raids by Black Legion spacecraft. Surging from the warp, Murder and Carnage-class cruisers struck at Traitorous. A prolific agri-world, Traitorous was the system's breadbasket. Wallowing grain barges came and went daily from the planet's upper atmosphere, keeping the rest of the Diamor system fed. Traitorous had defenses, a scattering of orbital platforms and several dedicated squadrons of Thunderbolt fighters to discourage pirates. Against the Chaos warships that came surging out from between the tumbling asteroids of the Zircon sprawl, they were wholly insufficient. Word of the attack swiftly reached the world of Turmalid, the Diamor system's seat of governance. Turmalid was a wonder of technological mastery. Claimed during the Great Crusade as a shorn half-planet, it had been rebuilt with thousands of miles of girder work, naval shipyards, docking cradles, and grav habs. The planet's artificial hemisphere served as a major staging point for Battlefleet Obscurus. Turmalid's governor, the ruler of the system, was the venerable Lord Admiral Gordus. The Lord Admiral had been a true hero in his day, and age had done little to dull his bellicose spirit. Outraged at the thought of losing his system's main food source to Chaos Raiders, Gordus dispatched a powerful fleet of system monitors and Obscurus warships to deal with the threat. So began the cat-and-mouse battle through the fringes of the Zircon sprawl, the outnumbered Chaos Raiders using the asteroid field to evade their enemies and continue their strikes against Traitorous' grain barges. The Imperial fleet found itself forced into escort and blockade duties, its lighter ships prowling the asteroid belt on the hunt for Chaos pirates, while its cruisers and battleships stood guard over the crucial grain shipments. With the Diamor system's navy dragged into protracted conflict, the Chaos forces could launch their next wave of attacks. An invasion fleet of ships from the Black Legion, Wordbearers, and Crimson Slaughter translated from the warp recklessly far in system. This sleek attack fleet encircled the industrial world of Ioline. Traitor drop craft darkened the polluted skies of Ioline's northern hemisphere, braving thundering Icarus batteries and orbital defense silos to disgorge thousands of warriors into the hives of the pan-polar states. Ioline's defense levies fought courageously, but the Chaos forces swept them aside with shocking ease. Within a matter of weeks, the pan-polar territories were in Chaos hands, and the southern habs of the Iron States, determined Imperial defense lines were drawn up. They would be of no use. With contemptuous amusement, Black Legion sorcerer Lord Zorphus turned the planet's polar defense silos against the Iron States. Warheads rained down on trails of fire, obliterating the southern hemisphere in an appalling rad holocaust. From the moment traitor boots crunched down into Ioline streets, the Black Legion warpsmiths had begun their evil work. By the time Lord Zorphus launched his killing strike upon the Iron State cities, a series of twisted biomechanical towers had been raised amidst the ruin of the pan-polar capital, Radvium. Graven with eldritch hexes and sigils, these towers formed the anchor points of the vast Hex Infernum. With the apocalyptic sacrifice of the Iron State's populace, the warpsmith's ritual was completed. A screaming rift burst into life between the warding towers of the Hex Infernum, a swirling portal to hell, within which demonic entities writhed. So began the warpsmith's true work, vile factory units rumbling to life all around the rift to produce a steady stream of demon engines into which the summoned entities could be bound. With the fleet tied up defending Traitorous and armoured reinforcements building on Ioline, the Chaos invaders were ready to strike at their true target. The spacecraft of the Crimson Slaughter made for the cursed world of Amthal and the hidden power it concealed. Amthal was equal parts paradise and pariah. To all appearances, it was a garden world of stunning natural beauty, whose bounteous forests, meadows, and oceans should have been devoured by the Imperium long ago. Yet every attempted settlement upon this huge planet had failed. Those who landed upon Amthal soon complained of headaches, nausea, and growing paranoia. Insomnia and hallucinations came next, worsening until the killing began. The verdant lands of Amthal bore the remains of over a dozen documented attempts at colonization, each one reduced to ghostly ruins and craters that told a chilling tale of frantic self-destruction. The ships of the Crimson Slaughter that swept down into orbit over the strange, gigantic world had been given the honor of striking first by Lord Zorphus. They would not do so unopposed, for in recent months the Adeptus Mechanicus had claimed Amthal. Even from orbit, the macro factories and prefab fortifications of the Metallican regiments were clearly visible, blighting the verdant continental landmasses like spreading mold upon a ripe fruit. Vast quarry-like pits were being dug by towering excavator engines. Each dig site was of incredible scale, surrounded by bunkers, bastions, generatoriums, shield generators, servitor factories, and anti-orbital batteries. There were also a number of fleet mechanicus explorator ships hanging in orbit, and these craft opened fire upon the Crimson Slaughter as the Chaos Planet Strike commenced. The volume of fire generated by the Metallican forces was incredible. Ancient weaponry filled the void of space with searing energy bolts and volleys of esoteric warheads. Ground-based servitor guns tracked the incoming Chaos ships, macro batteries spitting thousands of shells in a minute up into the atmosphere. The Crimson Slaughter battleships, Red Honor and Scimitar, swept on regardless, explosions blossoming across their void shields as they soaked up the ire of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Behind these mighty flagships came dozens of smaller warships and bulky troop transports. From them fell a rain of dreadclawed drop pods and armored landing craft, loaded with traitor warriors. This invasion force plunged recklessly through the Metallican flak curtain. Lasers punched through dreadclaws, bursting them like seed pods. Landing craft were buffeted by concussive explosions, tumbling from the sky to detonate upon the ground far below. Engines flared and blew out. Armor-glass canopies shattered, tearing pilots apart. The Crimson Slaughter attack waves came on, wings of Helldrakes screaming down around them with their guns blazing. From orbit, the Chaos Fleet rained death upon the Adeptus Mechanicus ground defenses, flattening bunkers and reducing batteries to craters. Under cover of their draconic demon engines and orbital fire support, more and more of the Crimson Slaughter made it to the surface of Amthal. Power-armored warriors in crimson and brass spilled from dreadclaw drop pods, poltergeist energy swirling around them as they raised their bolt guns and opened fire. The spiked ramparts of bulk landers yawned wide, vomiting masses of howling cultists into battle. Idyllic meadowlands were churned to muddy ruin as squadrons of traitor armor roared to war, while packs of demon engines crashed through dense forests and stomped across the blasted wastelands before the Metallican defense lines. Everywhere, the forces of chaos were on the advance. With typical fearlessness, the forces of the Scitarii and the Cult Mechanicus readied themselves to face the heretical hordes. The Crimson Slaughter's deployment had been strategically targeted. 5 major concentrations of Adeptus Mechanicus activity existed on Amthal, 3 in the northern hemisphere and 2 in the south. The Chaos forces landed in great strength around, and in some cases amidst, those heavily defended excavation sites. Scorning whatever designations the Metallicans had assigned these locations, Kharn the Relentless, master of the Crimson Slaughter, had given the primary landing zones code names of his own. To the north were war zones Hatred, Carnage, and Malice. To the south were war zones Perdition and Cruelty. Kharn himself led the assault against war zone Carnage, while favoured lieutenants led the other offensives. The leader of the Crimson Slaughter knew that his mission was to annihilate the Adeptus Mechanicus ground forces, and in so doing, win a mighty source of power for Abaddon's Black Crusade. In truth, though, Crannan cared little why Zorphus had ordered him to attack this world. The Chaos Space Marines of the Crimson Slaughter were cursed warriors, haunted by supernatural entities that drove them mad with their constant whispers and screams. Crannan knew that many considered his renegade chapter to be weak because of this, and ripe for slaughter or exploitation. He aimed to prove the opposite on Amthal. The Crimson Slaughter would show their might by securing a swift victory for the despoiler, and then move on to worlds where more blood could be shed. So motivated, the Crimson Slaughter drove hard into the teeth of the Adeptus Mechanicus defences. At each of the 5 war zones, masses of power-armoured heretics surged across no man's land with bolters roaring and chainswords at the ready. Bow waves of supernatural energy rolled before them, swirling masses of warp ghosts that buffeted the combatants and spattered ectoplasm across the battlefield. Metallican warriors found their mechanical components rebelling as ghosts flowed through their machinery, twisting the luckless cyborgs into hideous biomechanical nightmares. Scrap code blurted forth, sound turning to rancid pus as it clotted the air. Despite it all, the firepower brought to bear by the Adeptus Mechanicus was ferocious. Tracked battle servitors and serried ranks of Cicatrix drew up alongside many-legged walking tanks and ancient battle robots to unleash a killing barrage. The ground shuddered to the tread of the Knights of House Raven, while towering over all came the looming titans of the renowned Legio Metallica. The Adeptus Mechanicus had scoured efficient kill zones around each of their excavation sites, mile-wide strips of blackened ground that offered little in the way of cover from their merciless fire. What followed was absolute carnage. Hundreds of cultists and renegades were obliterated, but the Crimson Slaughter continued their advance regardless. Unnatural energies flowed around them, absorbing the worst of the firestorm, while fresh waves of heavy support elements landed to add their might to the battle. At Warzone Hatred, a dozen heretical engines of the Legio Excruciatus strode forwards, blitzing the enemy defense lines with overwhelming firepower. At Warzone Perdition, traitor forces were able to land in significant numbers amidst the Adeptus Mechanicus defense lines. Cicatrix formations wheeled with clockwork efficiency to catch the new threat in a lethal crossfire, but in doing so, were forced to slacken the weight of fire being hurled out into the kill zones. Seizing their opportunity, a spearhead of demon engines and Crimson Slaughter tanks punched through the enemy defences and tore open the Adeptus Mechanicus positions from within. The fighting raged on into darkness, traitor forces breaking through in some places, while the Adeptus Mechanicus defences held in others. Countless smaller zones of conflict blossomed across Amthal, as columns of reinforcements were ambushed, and large-scale outflanking or counterattack maneuvers were attempted. Though these conflicts were savage and costly, none was as important as the attack by Crannan and his warriors against Warzone Carnage. It was here that a strange phenomenon manifested itself, lending unprecedented strength to the traitor assault. Slowly at first, but with increasing speed and violence, the Crimson Slaughter found themselves gripped by strange energies. Drowning out the warped spirits that tormented them, these new malicious energies poured into the Chaos Space Marines like water into empty vessels. Those Chaos Space Marines so affected found themselves burning with unholy might, able to tear open tanks with their bare hands and shrug off enemy fire as though it were summer rain. With such incredible powers at their command, the Crimson Slaughter swiftly overran Warzone Carnage, claiming it in the name of their lord. Chapter 2. Kill, Maim, Burn. The Anointing. The Crimson Slaughter only briefly held the war zones of Amthal. The arrival of the Blood Angels saw a massive Imperial counterattack sweep across the planet, driving the renegades back. Even Crannan was put to flight by a tide of Death Company warriors, all as Lord Zorphus had planned. There were many parts to his scheme, of which the Crimson Slaughter were only the first, and even their deaths served the sorcerer's ends, clearing the way for what was to come. Deep within the bowels of the Black Legion warship Stygian Beast lay the sanctum of Lord Zorphus. The chamber was broad and shadowed. Its high ceiling held up 8 pillars of red-veined marble, its 8 walls stored with the sigils of the Chaos Guards. Warped flesh things dangled in brass cages, wailing from their many mouths. Bloated Ogren-like creatures lurked in the shadows, chained to massive drums skinned with human flesh. The floor of the sanctum bore a carrion octagram, an 8-sided ritual sign made from the charred and rotting bodies of sacrificial victims. Illumination spilled across it from a trio of onyx braziers dotted around the room's circumference. 2 burned with flames of yellow and green, the other was a leaping inferno of black and gold. At the heart of that hellish shrine, a dark ritual was well underway. Lord Zorphus stood at the chamber's centre, his back to a hideous altar that was as much squirming meat as it was iron and crystal. The scorched ruin of an ancient casket lay at the sorcerer's feet. The fell miserium that had been used to curse the blood angels with madness lay within. Around him in a circle stood his most favoured acolytes. Black Legion sorcerers and blank-masked cult demagogues. The figures swayed and chanted in the emerald firelight, forming harsh and sinister words that tore at their bleeding lips. "Brothers," intoned Zorphus, his voice deep and rich like metal brass. "Acolytes, we do the will of the gods. We do the will of the despoiler." "The despoiler," chanted his acolytes. "The miserium is burned," cried Zorphus, raising his jagged blade high. "The storm has dragged the angels from their perches and cast them into the abyss of madness." "The abyss," chanted his acolytes. "The ritual proceeds," smiled Zorphus cruelly. "The second anointing has been completed." "The second anointing," hissed the acolytes, as their master turned to look upon the small crystal spheres that hung in the air above the altar. There had been 3 when the Black Legion had entered the Dimor system, each filled with a dark, glimmering liquid. Now only 2 remained, slowly orbiting one another about the shattered remains of their broken brother. "The second anointing," chanted the acolytes again. As they did so, Lord Zorphus reached out and crushed another of the orbs in his armoured fist. Black, impossibly glowing ichor oozed between his fingers, drizzling into a slavering maw that peeled open in the fresh altar's surface. It grizzled hungrily, its thick, clumsy tongue cutting itself on misshapen crystal fangs as it guzzled down every last drop of the spilled fluid. As the last trickles were consumed, a wave of shadowy energies surged through the chamber. The acolytes raised a great cry, and at the chamber's edges, the chained drum slaves set their instruments to hammering out a frenzied rhythm. There was a roar like dragon's fire, and the fires in the second braziers curdled with dark tendrils of energy. Now, 2 tall pyres of gold and black flame leapt and danced in the sanctum. Only one remained green and yellow. As the drums continued to boom, Lord Zorphus turned back to his acolytes, raising his arms high. "So I have foreseen," he intoned, relishing the words, "to open the gate with an everborn scream. First come the 3-fold anointing. The blood of the scholars, the living machines bled. The cursed ones, haunted by power and open to the thirsting soil. The fallen angels. Nobility turned to madness and spilt blood. All these we have brought to pass. Only one step remains." Zorphus's acolytes chanted and cried out, the sorcerer basking for a moment in their wild adulation. "First Lord Crannan and his dogs bled the machine priests for us, and by their madness showed where the gate could be found." "The gate," boomed the acolytes, accompanied by the maddening pounding of drums. "Then we wrought a madness of angels, and as foreseen, They fell upon Crannon's cursed brothers with great fury. Even as they made war, they were the sacrificial blades in our hands. The blades, howled Zorphus's coven, many brandishing their own wicked ritual daggers. And now, drawled Lord Zorphus, must come the third and final anointing. The blood of friend and foe alike must run in rivers, so that the screaming stone be fed. He raised his blade once more, and then swept it down, hacking the burning remains of the Misereum in two. "Now!" he roared. "Now comes the anointed hour!" The drums ceased their beat, the acolytes froze, barely even daring to draw breath. For several heartbeats, the only sound in the sanctum was the crackle and flicker of the braziers. Then came a dolorous chime, and from the moors of the sanctum's vox gargoyles spilled the voice of the Stygian beast's captain. "Lord Zorphus!" "My lord, the warp vanes have detected multiple contacts translating beyond Onrix and moving rapidly in system. Their spoor is that of renegade warships, but they are not answering our challenges. Should we move to intercept, Lord?" "Would you deny the sacred blade of the gods themselves?" asked Zorphus, by way of reply. "Lord," came the confused response after a moment, and the sorcerer barked a mirthless laugh. "Fire on those ships, and I'll skin you myself. The final anointing is at hand. Kharn has arrived." Out in the void, a ragged flotilla burned hard for Amthal, plunging like a great dagger towards the cursed world. Upon the flank of each battle-scarred warship was banded the brazen rune of Kharn. Corbadash exulted in the G-force rush of the Dreadclaw's descent. The ancient drop pod plunged through Amthal's atmosphere, and the Kharn berserkers within felt every last pound of the crushing pressure. They had disabled the cross-atmospheric wards and graphitic compensators to make it thus. Such coddling comforts were for weaklings. Above, beyond Amthal's atmosphere, the battleships of the Butcher Horde's fleet were savaging their enemies. Below lay the place prophesied in blood, where the sons of Sanguinius would be fought and slain. They had already swept the crimson slaughter aside. No matter, thought Corbadash, with a brutal leer. The angels would face some real warriors now. "Soon I shall claim the skulls of the fallen angels," roared Corbadash over the shuddering howl of the Dreadclaw's descent. "Ha!" barked Vraka from across the pod. "You will stumble in my blood wake, Corbadash. I may leave you the chaff if you are lucky, but the skulls of the angels are mine." Corbadash growled as the butcher's nails bit deep into his mind, fueling his anger. One eyelid flickered, and his sharpened teeth ground together hard enough to crack enamel. "You," he grated in disgust. "You are slow, Vraka, old and frail. I would take your skull before theirs, were it even a worthy offering." The other berserkers strapped into the Dreadclaw laughed savagely at this, or spat threats and imprecations of their own. Chain axes revved. Fists were slammed against breastplates. The millennia-old Legion's salute perverted into a gesture not of honor, but of raw aggression. The berserkers' boasts were silenced, as the Dreadclaw's vox came alive with a howl of static. Through the rasping hiss came the voice of the betrayer. It was the voice of murder given physical form, a gravelly snarl that carried barely restrained fury in every bitten-out word. "Warriors of Kharn, listen well!" Corbadash knew this would be reaching out to every dropcraft in the massive attack wave about to fall upon the world below. He bridled at the arrogance of the betrayer, commanding the entire Butcher Horde to hear his words. The berserkers kept shouting and bragging, but they listened to him all the same. "In moments we land," growled Kharn. "And when we do, we kill for Kharn!" "Kill for Kharn!" roared the berserkers in response. "But know this, I lead the attack," rumbled Kharn menacingly, The most worthy skulls are mine. Those who forget, I butcher like dogs." The berserkers' war cries mingled with bellows of outrage and anger. Foam frothed over their blood-stained lips as they cursed the betrayer. Each swore they would claim more skulls than him, or even kill Kharn themselves, and in so doing win the blood god's eternal favour. "Blood for the blood god!" roared Kharn. "Skulls for the skull throne! Kill! Maim! Burn!" Then the Dreadclaw's retro thrusters fired with gut-punching force. The drop restraints released, and, as the pod's hatch irised open, the Khorne berserkers leapt out into battle. They were met by a hail of firepower. Vraka dropped out first, eager to make good on his boast. He was spun off his feet instantly, half his helm melted away by plasma. Corbedash leapt after him without hesitation, boots clanging down on his comrade's armoured corpse. He had not even drawn breath for a war cry before shots were hammering him like hail. A sane warrior might have at the very least flinched. Instead, Corbedash hoisted Vraka's body like a shield and waded into the rain of death. His former comrade's body danced and twitched as it was pummeled, blood spraying in all directions. "How many skulls will you claim now, eh, Vraka?" roared Corbedash, laughing madly. "Ha ha ha ha! How many?" Behind, more berserkers were dropping from their Dreadclaw, which was itself being riddled with heavy-caliber shots. To the fore, Corbedash could see grey-robed Adeptus Mechanicus warriors, drawn up in a firing line on the rocky ridge that overlooked the landing site. More cornate craft were slamming down all around, but the Scitarii were present in numbers, and in the distance, Corbedash could see knights looming over the trees. "It's just more skulls for the taking," he grinned, then hurled aside his comrade's corpse and charged. Galvanic rounds whined across the berserker, more spanging and bouncing off his red and brass plate. Electrical charge crackled across him where each shot struck home, and the smell of cooking flesh filled Corbedash's nostrils. He shrugged off the pain, just as he ignored the servo sparking out in his armour and the whine from his overstrained power pack. "Skulls for Khorne!" he bellowed, as his boots bit into the rocky ridge, propelling him forwards like a battering ram. He leapt the last few yards in a heartbeat, chain axe raised high, then crashed into the midst of his foes. His weapon swung and swung again, howling teeth chewing through metal and flesh, oily blood sprayed. Goggle-eyed heads bounced and rolled down the slope, all pallid flesh and sparking neck stumps. Corbedash took another shot to the chest, point blank, stopping one of his hearts dead. He ignored it, and butchered his way on through the press. These things were chaff, he thought through a red haze. They were just in the way. It was the angel skulls he wanted, and he would claim them, even if he had to battle Kharn himself for the honour. The cornate combat drop came down almost 20 miles outside of war-zone carnage. There was no order to the attack, no strategy or regimentation. At the very first sign of a chaos attack wave descending, the remaining Metallican forces around Carnage moved to intercept. They drew up in firing lines around the drop zone. They rapidly projected the flight trajectories of the enemy craft, lined up their sights upon precogitated landing sites, then waited for the optimum moment. The cornate craft met with a thunderous rain of fire, many exploding even before they hit the ground. More slammed down, only to be blown apart by volleys of missiles, or filled with phosphorus flames the moment their ramps yawned open. Still, the drop craft rained down, more blood-red vessels making landfall with every passing minute. Cornate cultists boiled from spike-hulled landers, only to be ripped apart by flickering rains of energy or atomized by explosive munitions. Berserkers launched themselves howling from within their craft and were punched off their feet by arquebus fire and searing laser beams. Here and there, the blood god's worshippers made it into the enemy ranks. They wrought bloody havoc, at least until combat servitors and armed robots lumbered in to pulp and crush. The cornate tide continued to grow, but the methodical annihilation being wrought by the Adeptus Mechanicus was sufficient to stem it. Then, driving down through the hammering flak screen came a Baroque Thunderhawk. Its hull twisted into grotesque shapes, and painted the hue of dried blood. Icarus warheads hammered into its armoured hull as it neared the ground. Trailing flames, the craft hurtled relentlessly onwards and executed a brutal combat landing amid a mass of electro-priests. The aircraft's front ramp crashed down like a castle drawbridge, and from within burst Kharn the Betrayer. Kharn took in the scene even as he charged down his craft's assault ramp, Gorechild roaring in his fist. "Kill!" howled Kharn, a single axe swing carving 3 electro-priests apart in a welter of gore. "Maim!" he roared, weaving around the swinging of a stave and shattering its wielder's skull with a thunderous headbutt. "Burn!" Kharn bellowed, firing plasma pistol shots into a nearby dune crawler until it detonated in a fierce fireball. Kharn's retinal display was swarming with foe runes and hazard warnings. The Betrayer saw only skulls to be taken, murder to be wrought. His hearts were hammering like bolters on full auto, his system flooded with combat drugs and demonic energies that slowed his reality to a crawl. Kharn stepped contemptuously aside as a volley of plasma blasts seared past, then charged into the midst of the tracked battle servitors that had fired them. Gorechild took the first, splitting it from the crown to tracked carriage in a single blow. The second rotated, gimbal gyros whining as it turned to get a clear shot. Kharn spun inside its firing arc. He hacked off its plasma culverin, then fired his pistol up through its jaw to reduce the thing's head to a smouldering stump. "Kill! Maim! Burn!" bellowed Kharn again, Vox Grill amplifying his voice into a godlike boom. "Blood! Blood for the blood god!" A deranged roar went up from the cornate masses, and they redoubled their efforts to close with their foes. Dispatching the third servitor, Kharn ploughed on into his massed foes, where they directed volleys of rad rounds at him. The Betrayer slid under the shots or hurled himself through them without slowing, where blank-faced robots tried to crush him in their ironclad fists. Gorechild whirled to lop off limbs, sunder metal bodies, and hack the heads from the magi who directed the machines. Nothing could stand before Kharn's fury. No enemy was quick or deadly enough to stop his rampage. He hacked down Cicatrix alphas and butchered their squads, chopped his way through masses of electro-priests, shrugging off their arc-bright blows and ripping them apart. With every moment that passed, the Betrayer's rampage barreled onwards through the Imperial forces and left ever greater heaps of corpses in his wake. It was then that the sky darkened with heavy craft, monstrous dropships resembling ragged chunks of Gothic architecture hurled at the planet by a careless guard. Void shields flickered and burned around the super-heavy ships as the Adeptus Mechanicus hammered them with fire. A false dusk fell as their shadows pooled and spread before they made their landings with ground-shaking force. Kharn growled his approval as he saw the ship's huge ramp slam down, crushing Metallicans and Khorne worshippers alike. Within glowed hellish forge fires, flickering through the sulphurous fumes that spilled across the battlefield. From their depths came vast cornate war engines, lords of skulls, and skitter-legged brass scorpions, falling upon the Metallicans like alpha predators. Millennia of war told Kharn that the fight was tipping fast in his favor. The Metallicans' perfect defense was cracking. With each new fault that developed, more and more berserkers, cultists, and demon engines slipped through the web of firepower. Ever more cornate craft rained from the skies, landing now amongst and even behind the Adeptus Mechanicus lines. Yes, thought the Betrayer. Battle was about to become unholy butchery. The ground shook with pounding footfalls, and a vox horn boomed out a binaric war cry. Looking up, the Betrayer saw a red-hulled knight looming over him, its head tilted down to pin him with its dispassionate stare. The war engine's roaring chain blade swept down, and Kharn hurled himself aside. He rolled to his feet with a manic laugh, sweeping Gorechild up in a thunderous arc. Mica dragon teeth bit through adamantium and ceramite in a rain of sparks, and the knight's severed chain blade crashed to the ground. The war machine took a step back, trying to swing its battle cannon to bear. Before it could, the Betrayer leapt high and clove through the knight's nearest knee joint. Again, Gorechild could not be denied. and the towering machine left half of one leg behind as it tried to back away. Slowly, like some great tree, the Imperial Knight tipped sideways before crashing down hard. Kharn laughed as his followers boiled across the felled machine, tearing its canopy open and hacking madly at the exposed pilot within. These fools were doomed, thought the betrayer contemptuously. Time to move on in search of a more worthy challenge. Corbedash sprinted hard across the open ground, leaping craters and dodging the bullet-riddled wrecks of crimson-slaughtered tanks. The ground shook and split beneath the grinding tracks of nearby Lord of Skulls, but Corbedash kept his footing with a warrior's skill. Other berserkers pelted along to either side of him, and hundreds more followed behind, but only one was ahead of him. Only one was closer to the smoke-belching ruins of the Adeptus Mechanicus fortifications, and the Blood Angels awaited there. Kharn, betrayer and hated favourite of Khorne. With Kharn in his sights, Corbedash ran all the harder. Both of his hearts were beating again now, the remarkable healing properties of the Adeptus Astartes sustaining his frame as he charged through the battle. They drove him forward, legs and arms pumping, war cries spilling from his lips. The edge of the ruins loomed. Engines screamed as, swooping out of the smoke, a trio of black-hulled storm ravens shot overhead. Missiles detached from their wings on trails of fire, streaking down over Corbedash's head and detonating amongst the cornate horde. He felt the heat wash from the blast, and his auto-senses dulled for a moment to preserve his hearing from the thunderous booms. Corbedash kept running. Those who died were weak, not worthy of his thoughts. Those who lived remained as rivals. Kharn had reached the edge of the prefabs now, clearing a mangled barricade in a single leap and vanishing amid the shadows of the looming ruins. Corbedash was hot on his heels, vaulting the barricade and sprinting on along the cracked ferrocrete of a war-torn processional. Lightning flickered between the buckled pylons that lined the roadway, and heaps of rubble laid before the sundered facades of buildings, like guts spilled from a corpse. Kharn was nowhere to be seen. "Come on! Come on!" roared Corbedash, firing his bolt pistol in the air. "Angels of death! Angels of the corpse god! Where are you?" More berserkers were spilling into the streets behind him now, as they would all along this edge of the battle-scarred complex. "Are you afraid to face real warriors?" screamed Corbedash, anger surging hot through his veins and washing his vision with a haze of red. In answer, the storm ravens swept overhead, coming back the other way and straight up the processional. A howling storm of bolts washed the ground before them, sending Khorne berserkers juddering to the floor in spattered halos of blood. At the same moment, the ruins to either side of the street came alive with black-armoured figures. Bellowed Baalite war cries rang out across the ruins. Jump packs coughed and spat flame and, like the closing jaws of a predatory beast, a wave of Death Company Marines sprung from the flanks of the processional to attack. "Yes!" leered Corbedash, turning and charging straight at the nearest black-clad warrior. He swung his chain axe in a long arc, aiming to disembowel his foe before the final decapitating strike. The Blood Angel was too quick. Snarling through his vox grill, the loyalist swung his chainsaw to parry the blow. The two weapons met in a spray of sparks, chain teeth grinding against one another. Corbedash leaned all his weight upon his weapon, trying to bull through the Blood Angel's guard, but found his savage strength held at bay. The berserker's eyes bulged behind his faceplate as he realized it was he, not the Blood Angel, who was being pushed back. "You will not take the palace, traitor!" shouted the Black Space Marine, his whole body shaking with rage. "Horus will fall!" By way of a response, Corbedash kicked his enemy as hard as he could in the knee. Ceramite buckled, bones shattered, and the loyalist pitched sideways as his leg gave out beneath him. It was all the opening Corbedash needed. The berserker stepped aside as the Blood Angel's chain blade chewed into the ground, raising his axe and bringing its whirling teeth straight down on the enemy's neck. Blood jetted as he hewed the Death Company Marine's head from its armoured shoulders. Reaching down, Corbedash plucked the helmeted head from the ground, hoisting it high and bellowing out praise to Khorne. Here was his offering, the first of many. This was a bloody crucible in which the blood god's favour could be won. But then, if that were true, thought Korbodash suddenly, where was Kharn? With a snarl, the berserker maglocked his victim's helmet to his hip and plunged on into the ruins. Wherever the betrayer was, he thought fiercely, that was where the true glory would be had. Perhaps he would even slay Kharn with his own blade, and then he, Korbodash, would become the chosen of Khorne. Blood in the streets. Kharn felt the enemy moving all around him. He knew that they were out there. He could scent their souls, taste the blood pounding through their veins. The numbers were nothing like those of the warriors who followed him, but each angel was mighty in his own right. Kharn knew the Death Company's leaders would be coordinating their attacks, moving not as a horde, but as a single entity to reap the Khorne worshippers' lives in great numbers. Lords of Skulls ground down flaming streets, black-clad blood angels disintegrated before their gunfire. Khorne worshippers flung themselves mindlessly at their foes, dozens blown off their feet in hails of bolter fire before they could get to grips with the Death Company. Kharn exhorted them onwards, bellowing a constant mantra of blood-mad hatred through the Vox. He cared nothing for strategy or lies. He cared only that Khorne have his due. "Kill! Maim! Burn!" roared Kharn, as he smashed through a cracked wall and into a wide roadway between two sagging data shrines. He emerged between the mass of berserkers and cultists charging from one direction, and a jump-packing band of Death Company Marines coming from the other. Kharn's eyes settled on the Death Company chaplain who led the Lost Brothers. His armour was magnificent in its artifice. His croziers crackled with power. Here was a worthy skull for Khorne, thought the betrayer with a surge of battle lust. "Kill! Maim! Burn!" bellowed Kharn again, breaking into a headlong charge down the ruined street. The Khorne worshippers swept in behind him, howling like mad dogs at the prospect of bloodshed. The Death Company did not slow. Even with Kharn the betrayer coming straight at them, they boomed out war cries of their own and jetted hard into battle. Kharn met the first of the black-armoured warriors with a point-blank plasma blast to the face. The shot vaporized the Blood Angel from the gorget upwards, and Kharn shouldered his corpse aside with contempt. Storm Ravens screamed low overhead, their rockets raising leaping fireballs in the next street along. "Blood for the Blood God!" shouted Kharn, smashing the berserker from his path with Gorechild, then lashing out at a Death Company Marine. His swing was stopped before it could connect, met in a burst of crackling energy by the croziers of the Death Company chaplain. "Face me, monster!" boomed the chaplain over the clangor of battle. "I am Daenor of the Blood Angels!" The betrayer barked a laugh. "Ha! It's a fool who places his head on the block and dares the executioner to take his best swing. And I am no fool," growled Kharn, stepping back from this challenger and maglocking his gun to his thigh. "How long do you think you can stop me from taking your head, Daenor of the Blood Angels? 5 seconds?" Kharn swung Gorechild back and forth in roaring cuts. 10? "I will break you as Sanguinius did Commander before the gates of the Emperor's palace, traitor!" responded Daenor. "I am a son of the angel." "There was only ever one angel," growled Kharn, his voice raising to a shout. "And he was red!" Kharn hurled himself at the chaplain with breathtaking speed. Daenor swung his croziers, attempting to crush the betrayer's skull. Instead, he took Kharn's shoulder to his breastplate, ceramite cracking under the impact. Daenor's jump pack flared, propelling him backwards out of his enemy's reach. It was a timely move. Gorechild's screaming teeth only missed Daenor by a hair's breadth. The chaplain landed some distance from the swirling street fight, and Kharn followed, hacking through friend and foe alike. Kharn charged again, swinging Gorechild in an overhead cut. Daenor blocked with his croziers. The chaplain raised his bolt pistol, but Kharn grabbed its muzzle and squeezed, crushing the barrel. His enemy dropped the weapon with a curse and pistoned a punch into Kharn's faceplate instead. Kharn laughed as his helm rang like a struck bell. This one gave good sport. The betrayer swung Gorechild in a series of lightning-fast cuts, striking crackling blasts of energy from his foe's weapon each time he parried. He drove the chaplain back until his jump pack thumped against the data temple wall, then spun in a mighty full circle swing. With nowhere to go, the chaplain fired his jump pack again and shot straight upwards, but not quickly enough. Gorechild whipped around and caught the chaplain's shin as he lifted off, buckling armor and shattering bone. Kharn's enemy landed in a ragged hole, part-way up the data temple wall, and limped inside. The betrayer knew that denote was leading him away from the remaining death company. He didn't realize that Kharn cared nothing for the fate of those who fought in the streets behind him. They were all just meat and skulls. They would all be claimed. Kharn swung Gorechild again, cleaving a ragged entrance into the building. Roaring, he plunged through the rent and into the temple's rubble-strewn interior. Kharn ran along one corridor, then turned into another, ignoring the sparking hourglass panels and sacred data stacks that surrounded him. He could hear the thump of his victims' hearts ahead and upwards. Without a second thought, the betrayer crouched, then executed an inhuman leap, his incredible strength propelling him up through the ceiling into the corridor above. Rubble rained down as Kharn landed before his resolute enemy. Staggering on his mangled leg, denote raised his crozius before him like a holy symbol to ward away some demon. In response, Kharn dropped his shoulder and charged headlong. He hit the chaplain at the waist and propelled him off his feet. Kharn roared as he hammered the chaplain backwards into the corridor's far wall and out, in an explosion of ferrocrete dust into the street beyond. Kharn looked slowly up from the cloven body of his ambitious would-be murderer. An Imperial Reaver Titan loomed into view above him, footsteps shaking the ground. The engine seemed to fill up the whole world with its enormity. Its shadow engulfed him utterly, throwing a shroud across both Kharn and the maimed chaplain, who still lay in the roadway. The metallican emblem upon the Reaver's chest left Kharn in no doubt of its loyalties. The Titan raised one tank-sized foot and took a striding step down the street. Kharn leapt back as the engine's foot descended, slamming down like a pile driver. The ground buckled beneath the god machine's tread, and Kharn was hurled unceremoniously from his feet. He cursed, scrambling upright again amidst the billowing dust and unnatural shadow. The betrayer felt the air pressure contract around him, his ears popping and his armor crawling with corpuscent as the war engine's void shields passed over and enveloped him. The Titan hadn't even registered the foe beneath its feet, its weapons drawing down upon targets in more distant streets. It stung the betrayer's martial pride to be treated as an irrelevance, and he howled with anger as he pumped plasma shots up the thing's knee joint. This was no night, however. The ravening blasts of energy splashed against the Titan's leg, blackening its paintwork, but achieving little else. Then the Titan was moving again, swinging its other leg forwards to pass the first. The roadway was barely wide enough for the god machine to progress down it, but that mattered little. Where the Titan's weapon limbs struck the buildings, they simply tore away great chunks of masonry, smashing the building aside, with the ease of a man parting tall grass. Rubble sluiced down upon Kharn in a landslide as the Titan swept over him. The betrayer cursed in fury. The sundering wreckage and billowing dust engulfed him. He fought against the stony tide, but darkness swallowed him as the rubble closed over his head. Kharn raged. He thrashed. He shattered and clawed until he was free once again. By the time he had dragged himself from the tumbled ruin, both the Titan and his chaplain victim were gone. Denied his worthy skull, the betrayer's rage was beyond mortal comprehension. A wave of pure fury rolled out from his armoured form, scorching the rubble black, and his deafening war cry shattered those few windows that remained in the street's battered facades. Over the rooftops of the ruins around him, Kharn could see the godlike forms of more Imperial Titans moving, wading through the devastation with the weapons tracking right and left. As they sighted his followers, their guns lit with apocalyptic fury, blazing columns of light and fire, stabbing downwards to blow buildings apart and scour the streets of Khorne worshippers. There was bloodshed in this, thought Kharn, but not glory. Not the skulls of the Imperial lapdogs. This could not be allowed. The Titans must die. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of violence. The titans of Legio Metallica swept into war-zone carnage, bulldozing those structures that got in their way, and blasting ragged holes in the Kharn horde wherever they caught sight of them. The remnants of the vastly outnumbered Death Company disappeared amidst the mayhem, most likely slain to the last. Without their chaplains to guide them, those blood angels lost to the Black Rage would not notice the danger of their position or recognize an extraction point, even if they were standing in it. This left the red-armored psychopaths of the Butcher Horde crashing against the titans of the Legio Metallica like waves against towering cliffs. Kharn witnessed whole bands of the faithful crushed by descending footfalls. He saw missiles the length of rhinos slam down one after the other, filling roads with fire and reducing warbands to ash. He felt the drumming pressure of building-sized weapons discharge over his head, and watched thermobaric shockwaves burst cultists like blood-filled balloons as they rolled across them. Kharn fought like a lunatic, exhorting the followers of Kharn to greater heights of violence, and spitting scorn upon them where they showed weakness. It was Kharn that led a loping warhound titan out into the wreckage-scattered square before the Eastern Forge Temple, and straight into the teeth of a trinity of blood. Booming monstrous war cries, the three super-heavy demon engines hammered the titan with fire from every side, collapsing its void shields, and rolling forwards to hack it apart with vast chain cleavers. It was Kharn also, who scaled the flank of a towering Fanctorum stack at the head of 50 Kharn berserkers, and leapt from its height onto the carapace of the Imperial Reaver as it was moving between engagement zones. The betrayer hacked his way through the war engine's armoured hull, leading those few berserkers who had survived the strafing of the Titan's Gatling blasters. They butchered the machine's crew, leaving it looming cold and dead in the middle of the street. By the time darkness fell across the blazing ruins around the Adeptus Mechanicus dig site, casualties had become horrific on both sides. The streets had been baptized once more in the blood of the slain, the blood god's dew staining the streets. The Death Company were annihilated, and no fewer than 6 engines of the Legio Metallica had either fallen or been so badly damaged by their deranged foes that they had no choice but to disengage, unable to continue the fight without repairs. In return, the Blood Angels and God Machines had massacred vast swathes of Kharn worshippers. They had piled their bodies in bloody mounds and reduced their war engines to sparking scrap metal. Dozens of demon engines had been blown apart, and of the vast red attack wave that had swept down upon the landing zone earlier that day, only scattered warbands remained. Whatever cohesion the Kharn attack had possessed was broken, and as the surviving Legio Metallica engines limped away into the night, so too did the last of the Kharn forces scatter to the 4 winds. Kharn lived still, upon a world full of foes. The greatest remaining strength of the Butcher Horde followed in his footsteps as he set out from warzone carnage into the firelit night, pushing west onto the dust plains in search of the roving Imperial patrols and Metallican facilities that dotted that cratered expanse. The betrayer knew that the Blood God would be pleased with his offerings this day, for thousands of skulls had been piled before his great brass throne. But there must always be more. For Kharn's lust for murder is never sated, and so Kharn pressed on in search of fresh skulls to claim. Kharn's Butcher Horde. The Kharn horde that attacked Amthal was a ragged and fractious alliance of bloodthirsty lunatics held together by the unbreakable will of Kharn the Betrayer. Separate from the invasion force led by Lord Zorphus, Kharn's Butcher Horde nonetheless furthered the will of the Black Legion thanks to the machinations of Abaddon the Despoiler. Kharn the Betrayer led his monstrous Butcher Horde to Amthal with but a single goal. He sought to take the heads of the most worthy Blood Angels' heroes, to hack their skulls from their necks and place them at the foot of Kharn's great throne. Where that notion had come from, not even Kharn could say. The Betrayer's perception of reality was so warped by rage that he could not be sure whether he had been given his task in some gore-drenched visions from Kharn, or whether some outside agency had planted the seed in his own mind. Not that it mattered. Kharn's service to Kharn was absolute, his manic devotion so powerful that, now that the idea had taken root in his mind, no force in the galaxy would keep him from butchering the masters of the Blood Angels like cattle. Kharn had not set out with the intention of forging a vast army of conquest to aid him in this quest. To Kharn's mind, those who needed others to fight their battles were weaklings undeserving of victory. Rather, the betrayer's brutal deeds had spread throughout reality like ripples upon the surface of a bloody pool. So spectacular was the carnage he wrought, so monstrous the butchery of his passing, that Kharn's faithful were drawn in his wake. At first, Kharn fought alone, then at the head of a warband of Khorne berserkers. After slaughtering his way across the Sundered Reach, the betrayer had found himself the master of a murderous army. By the time he had exterminated all life in the Pandoric colonies, a whole fleet of spike-proud warships were his to command, their holds crammed with maniacs, murderers, and hellish war engines. It was not power that Kharn had sought, but nor did he cast it aside. Like any true servant of Khorne, the betrayer knew a deadly weapon when he saw one. If it was the blood god's will that he wield that mighty implement of death, then who was he to question it? So was the butcher horde forged, and a terrifying engine of war it was. Great masses of Khorne berserkers formed its thundering heart, the warriors from dozens of disparate warbands drawn together in the name of unholy murder. Only the overriding will of the betrayer kept this psychotic horde of killers from ripping each other to pieces, and even then, blood was spilled daily between them. Kharn cared nothing for the lives of his followers, and so did nothing to intercede. So long as they wrought fit slaughter upon the foe when the time came, it mattered nothing to him if the weak were weeded out by the strong in the meantime. Every warrior slain was another skull for Khorne. For their part, though the berserkers of Kharn's horde followed him as an avatar of their bloody god's will, many amongst their ranks saw him as both a hated rival and the ultimate skull to claim in order to win Khorne's favour. Such is the way of the blood god's servants. It was a rare day that the betrayer did not have to strike down a handful of his own followers as a result of their frenzied attempts on his life. Many more servants of the blood god followed in Kharn's wake, lending their strength and numbers to the butcher horde. Seething masses of cultists screamed praise to Khorne as they followed their demigods of slaughter into battle. Looming demon princes led their own bands of followers to war in the betrayer's name, bringing with them rumbling battle tanks and deranged hellbrutes that lent the horde heavy firepower. Most terrifying of all were the mass demon engines of the butcher horde. Among the packs of prowling mauler fiends and defilers towered super-heavy abominations such as the scuttling brass scorpions and the lords of skulls. Driven by the caged fury of Khorne's most powerful demons, these engines of annihilation were nearly as deadly as the betrayer himself. Slaughter Unleashed. The traitor invasion of the Diamor system did not go unanswered. Responding to astropathic distress cries, a force of blood angels converged on the system. Though subject to the sorcerous trickery of Lord Zorphus, the sons of Sanguinius fell upon Amthal and drove back the crimson slaughter. Yet worse threats were looming. The scrying of the Black Legion's sorcerers had revealed much of what transpired within the Diamor system. Guided by these prophecies, Lord Zorphus had set plans in motion that seemed, to the Imperial Strategos of Tormalid, like weirdly prescient madness. When the first Blood Angel ships broke from the warp within the Diamor system, Zorphus's flagship was waiting for them. Hanging alone in the void, the Stygian beast had played host to a terrible blood ritual. Sacrificing the Miserium, a hideous artifact Zorphus had acquired at great cost in munitions, fuel and war machines, as well as the lives of many warriors, the ritual had birthed a roiling psychic storm. The strike cruisers carrying the warriors of the Blood Angels' 5th Company had barely torn their way into reality when they were engulfed by its energies. Coiling thunderheads of unclean warp light billowed through space, engulfing the Blood Angel ships and shaking them like trees before a hurricane. On board, systems sparked and failed, while secondary explosions wrought damage throughout the craft. The main damage was to the Blood Angels themselves, however. Bombarded by terrible visions of traitor victories and their angelic Primarch torn apart by leering demons, one battle brother after another succumbed to the black rage. Like a psychic plague, it swept the decks of the strike cruisers Angelic Blade and Flame of Baal, reducing nearly 100 noble warriors to deranged killers in a matter of minutes. Those few Blood Angels to survive the onslaught with their sanity intact waited for the killing blow to fall, but it did not. With his curse unleashed, Zorphus turned the Stygian beast and retreated swiftly, mere minutes before fresh Blood Angel spacecraft exited the warp. These were the strike cruisers, Sanguine Tear and Halo of Blood, accompanied by a number of smaller warships that raced to form a cordon around the drifting craft of the 5th Company. With elements of the Blood Angels' 1st and 2nd Companies now present in force, it seemed that the Black Legion had missed a perfect chance to eliminate the 5th Company at a single stroke. The Blood Angels were no fools, however. They had seen the flaw used against them before, and recognized such plots for the weakness-exploiting stratagems they were. What they could not comprehend was how releasing the cage fury of the flaw could benefit the heretics' schemes. Unsettled and angry, the Blood Angels swiftly formulated a response. Under the direction of Astaroth the Grim, warriors from the 1st and 2nd Companies corralled their fallen brethren and helped to prepare them for their last tragic battle. After dispatching an honor guard to Tormalid to liaise with and defend the Lord Admiral, the main strength of the Blood Angels' force made straight for Amthal. Lord Zorphus watched with satisfaction. Upon entering the Diamor system, he had found that strange energies spilling from Amthal muddied the currents of fate, rendering them unreadable. He knew what lay beneath the cursed world's surface, and had been ready for such disturbances. Zorphus's plans had been carefully laid long in advance, the steps of a vast ritual to be trodden one by one. Already, the phenomena experienced by Kharn and his followers around Warzone Carnage had shown the sorcerer where his true prize lay, and anointed the sacred ground with blood. Now the sons of Sanguinius were rushing to enact the second step. Let them battle the Crimson Slaughter and bleed in their turn. All serve Zorphus's ends. So began an Imperial counter-offensive that pushed the Crimson Slaughter back on every front. As the Blood Angel strike cruisers and their escorts thundered into orbit over Amthal, they lent their firepower to the beleaguered ships of the fleet mechanicus. The traitor warships retreated, leaving their ground forces cut off. Urgent missives winged out into the void from the Crimson Slaughter's warp speakers, increasingly furious demands for Black Legion aid that went wholly ignored. With the way cleared, Blood Angel drop pods and flights of Storm Ravens and Thunderhawk landers sped down through Amthal's atmosphere. They dropped spearheads of elite forces in support of the Metallica Maniples and the Knights of House Raven. The traitor invaders now found themselves fighting unsupported against a greatly strengthened foe. Around Warzone Hatred, the gains made by the traitor Legio Excruciatus were lost in a matter of hours as Blood Angel's tanks and aircraft joined House Raven in an unstoppable roiling breakthrough. Imperial casualties were heavy, but within hours, no fewer than 5 of the traitor's Legio's engines lay blazing in the dirt, while the rest were forced to stage a fighting retreat before their vengeful foes. At Warzone's malice, perdition, and cruelty, the Crimson Slaughter were hit hard. In many cases, warbands had been bogged down in their cleared kill zones, unable to break through the unfaltering Adeptus Mechanicus defense lines. Those same forces were trapped between the avenging Blood Angels to their rear and the Metallican guns to their fore. Desperate battles erupted all around Warzone Hatred and Cruelty, while at Perdition the Crimson Slaughter manned defences recently seized from the Adeptus Mechanicus and now fought as the besieged. It was Warzone Carnage that the greatest fury of the Blood Angels fell, just as Zorphus had hoped. The newly created Death Company was set loose, squad after squad of black-clad psychopaths, leaping from Storm Raven gunships to pin Kharn and his followers behind the defences they had so recently cleared. Led by Astaroth, Limates, and the inspirational Death Company chaplain, Deonor, the Death Company clashed with the Crimson Slaughter in a series of brutal battles. By that point, The strange energies coursing through the Crimson Slaughter were beginning to have a terrible effect. As they fought, many renegades found their bodies bursting into spectral flame. Others mutated with sudden ferocity, squirming tentacles and bulging muscles spilling from their sundered suits of power armor. The Blood Angels exploited this degeneration amongst their foes, punishing them with one furious assault after another, until Crannan and his last surviving warriors were forced to stage a breakout or be crushed mercilessly. After days of bloody fighting, victory on Amthal appeared to be within the grasp of the Imperial forces. On Tormlid, Gordus's advisors scoffed that the true nature of the traitor was revealed in the Black Legion's betrayal of their Crimson Slaughter allies. They feared to face the Emperor's angels, went the cry, yet Zorfus had only been biding his time. The Crimson Slaughter were expendable. They and their enemies had all served as sacrificial victims within his grand ritual. Following their deaths, the next step was taken. In the darkness of the void, fresh blooms of filthy warp light flickered as a new fleet of traitor warships entered the system, precisely when and where Zorfus had foreseen. Upon every hull was blazoned the monstrous rune of Kharn, the Blood God, and within the lead battleship rode his mightiest mortal champion. Kharn the Betrayer had come for the skulls of Sanguinius' greatest sons, and he would not be denied. The Khornate war fleet bludgeoned their way into orbit over Amthal, with no thought for their own survival. With their void shields aflame and their gun decks spitting fury, the Khornate craft rained Dreadclaws, Charybdises, and heavy landing craft down over war-zone carnage. The secret of Amthal. The adepts of the Adeptus Mechanicus understood the true prize that the Black Legion sought upon Amthal, even if few others did. It was a thing that had brought techno-archaeologist Dominus Ivasnophon and his followers from the Forgewood of Metallica to this cursed world. It was a power of unbelievable magnitude, though the Imperium and the Traitors sought it for very different reasons. Lord Zorfus knew its true nature, for it was he and his cabal who had located it for Abaddon. The despoiler had set his forces in motion at once. The battle to come would bear upon the success of the 13th Black Crusade, for it offered an opportunity to extend Abaddon's crimson path like a bloody wound across Imperial space. The secret that the Black Legion sought, and that the Adeptus Mechanicus were racing them to seize, lay deep beneath the surface of Amthal. It was ancient, unspeakably, unimaginably so. It was a device the size of a world, forged by godlike beings before Terra had even spawned its first single-cell organisms. It was a cage for the infernal creatures of the warp, a weapon to dwarf the damnation cache that had slipped through Abaddon's fingers on Pandarax. And, according to the divination of Lord Zorfus and his followers, it was full to the brim. It required only the correct ritual to be broken open, at which point the sudden release of so many warp entities would tear a gaping wound in reality itself. The skies over Amthal's northern hemisphere flickered with flame and churned with blood-stained clouds as the slaughterers of the Blood God descended. Voxnets planet-wide, filled with a deranged mantra, screamed over and over again by a million rage-filled voices. Kill, maim, burn. Kill, maim, burn! The sprawling war horde of Kharn the Betrayer fell upon war-zone carnage like the blow of some titanic axe, drawn by the sheer scale of bloodshed already enacted there. There was no subtlety or precision to the landing, no strategic disposition. Instead, drop pods and landing craft slammed down all around the area, spilling tides of murderous lunatics and snarling demon engines into the fray. At first, it seemed as though the Khornate forces had misdropped catastrophically and would be cut to pieces for their lack of cohesion. Night detachments and maniples of Adeptus Mechanicus Scitarii moved into brackets the haphazard landing sites with lethal firepower. Sweeping green pastures blasted mudflats and blazing ruins alike with their tightly ordered volleys. The first waves of Khornate forces were slain before they could so much as scream their war cries. Yet as their mangled bodies crashed to the ground, their comrades were already trampling over them to get to grips with the foe. In ever greater numbers, Kharn's followers crashed down upon the war zone and surged to battle, joined by fresh waves of demon engines flowing in from Ireline. Soon, the Imperial defenders were being overrun. Deranged cultists died in their droves, only for hundreds more to scramble over the ramparts formed by their bodies and fling themselves to the attack. Cornate war engines rumbled forwards, the ground shuddering beneath brass treads as their firepower punched knights off their feet or ripped through whole phalanxes of enemy infantry. Masses of Khorne berserkers pelted forwards through rains of shot and energy blasts to chop heads from necks and eviscerate torsos with their snarling chain axes. At the head of the horde, utterly unstoppable, came Kharn himself. The betrayer was a force for unbridled destruction, a whirlwind of murder and a lodestone of carnage around which the Khorne berserkers massed. Charging through the mud and fire of the battlefield, the betrayer hacked through everything in his path, leading his rapidly cohering horde in a thrust towards the heart of war-zone carnage. It was here that Kharn and his monstrous army of killers met the remaining Death Company in savage battle. During their fight with the Crimson Slaughter, the Death Company had been overextended, their ranks thinned by attrition. With the Adeptus Mechanicus forces around the Cornate landing zone obliterated, the cursed sons of Sanguinius stood alone against the Cornate charge. The fighting that followed was apocalyptic in its ferocity. Shepherded by Astorath and Chaplain Daenor, the Death Company met their enemy's charge with one of their own, seeking to stagger the foe and buy time for reinforcements to reach them. In places around the ruined Adeptus Mechanicus defences, this tactic worked. Chaplain Amates led a suicidal jump assault against a rumbling Lord of Skulls, engaging the machine amongst the tumbled wreckage of a combat servitor fabricatorum. Circling the demon engine upon wings of flame, the Blood Angels wore it down with constant hit-and-run attacks until, at last, they were able to shatter the blood tanks upon its back and leave it powerless amid the ruins. The fight cost them dearly, the raging demon engine sending one Death Company brother after another screaming into oblivion with warring swings of its great cleaver. Elsewhere, wave upon wave of cultists and berserkers hurled themselves at Astorath the Grim and his squad of Death Company, who had been pushed back to the blazing shell of a shrine to the Omnissiah. Mounds of corpses built up around the shrine's walls as the Imperial warriors battled against overwhelming odds. But soon, only Astorath fought alone amidst the mangled bodies of his brothers. Amidst the rubble-strewn streets, Death Company Chaplain Daenor and another band of surviving Death Company met the headlong charge of Kharn the Betrayer and his followers. The battle was swift and savage, devolving into a sprawling melee in which no quarter was asked and none was given. Kharn butchered his way through the black-armoured Blood Angels until Daenor met him in single combat, calling upon the Primarch to aid him in destroying the Betrayer. Though he fought with courage and skill, Daenor was utterly outmatched by his berserk opponent, being forced back over the tumbled corpses of his own slain brothers and away from the last few who lived. Those warriors fought on, surrounded, yet the approach of a monstrous trinity of blood meant that they had but minutes to live. It was at that moment, as Kharn finally hacked Daenor's arm from his shoulder and kicked him to the ground, that the Titans of Legio Metallica arrived to turn the tables. The ground shook as the towering war engines waded into the Cornate horde, reeve as the warlords hammering the ruins with incredible fusillades of firepower. Driven apart by the explosive mayhem that ensued, Kharn and his last few victims lost track of one another in the swirling firestorm. After hours of savage battle street to street and block to block, even the Titans would be forced to retreat before the insanity of the Cornate hordes. Regardless, their attack had fragmented Kharn's forces into disparate warbands, who scattered away from the ruins of war-zone carnage, each seeking to claim the greatest tally of skulls for Khorne. Chapter 3. Ritual's End. The Banshee Stone. The sanctum swam with warp light, the delirious illumination twisting everything into nightmarish shapes. Lord Zorphus's altar writhed and screamed in the blazing glare thrown by the 8 lit braziers. Even the decomposing corpses scattered around the floor appeared to twitch and stir. Dark sorcery suffused the air, and the sense of potentiality was overwhelming. Though his ritual neared completion, Lord Zulfus was furious. Worse, for the first time since coming to the Diamor system, he knew a sliver of doubt. "Tell me again," he commanded the quaking acolyte before him. "Be swift and be concise." The robed cult magister could not hide his fear. Despite the featureless mask that concealed his face, he reeked of terror and shook like a leaf in a gale. "The angels, my lord," he stammered. "They struck Ireline. Somehow they remained undetected. They must have." "Concise," repeated Zulfus, his deep voice as cold as the void of space. "They teleported to the planet's surface, Lord, an elite band. The Golden Angel led them, the one they call Sanguinor. Lord, they destroyed the Hex Infernum. Ireline is no more." Lord Zulfus nodded, absorbing the information and allowing the reality of it to flow through him. A lesser servant of chaos might have raged. They might have slain the messenger in a fit of spite, perhaps even swept the chamber of all life. Zulfus could have done it in a heartbeat. His power was fearsome, and at that moment, his anger great. Instead, he stayed perfectly still for several drawn-out seconds as his mind whirled. Zulfus had foreseen much of what had transpired in the Diamor system, but with the demonic clamour of Amthal crowding the paths of the future, this impulsive Blood Angel attack had been invisible to him. If it could happen once, it could happen again. Worse, now that the future had been altered, there was no telling how it might spiral out of control. Alternate paths flickered before his mind's eye. Glimpses of oracular insights gleamed before his fleets invaded the Diamor system. Some of them threatened defeat. That could not be allowed. Zulfus breathed out slowly, sorcerous embers dancing on his breath. He became conscious once more of the Magister, now prostrate upon the floor before him and shaking with terror. "Get up," commanded the sorcerer. "I've no use for worms." The cultist scrambled to his feet and made to apologize. Zulfus raised a hand to forestall him. "Shut up. Listen to me now. You will proceed to the Arcanium and relay my commands. The Banshee Stone is to be woken and made ready for transit. Now." The Magister turned and rushed away. Zulfus dismissed the man from his thoughts, instead taking a moment to focus his mind before he opened a Vox address to the ships of his fleet. Upon his command, the Black Legion would fall upon Amthal, and the final stage of the ritual would begin. And then, the paths of fate would converge. Lord Zulfus stood upon the lip of the war-zone carnage excavation site and laughed. There was not a single Imperial soldier present to repel the Black Legion, which could mean only one thing. The war had spread his enemy's forces too thin. They must have realized that rushing troops piecemeal into war-zone carnage might slow the Black Legion, but would not stop them. Instead, some canny mind amongst the enemy had surely elected to mass their forces, then strike a killing blow. It was sound thinking, but it would be their undoing. "Our enemies do not understand the magnitude of their error," said Zulfus, addressing the Chosen standing silently behind him. He spoke over the Vox, compensating for the thunderous roar of the Black Legion dropcraft coming in to land all around. Tank engines thundered. Haildrakes shrieked as they swooped overhead. Armor clattered as Black Legion warriors took up defensive positions. "They fear to face us, Lord," snapped the monstrous Terminator champion, Dorsgog the Slaughterman. "No," replied Zulfus. "It's not fear, but sense. They're massing, closing a noose around us." Another of the Chosen, the ornately armoured Versek, panned his gaze across their surroundings. Warzone carnage had been reduced to ruin by the successive battles fought across it. There was little here now but rubble, wrecks, and mounds of corpses. "They're wise, Lord," he rumbled. "This is poor ground for a fight. They force us into the role of defender in a battle where attack must surely carry the day." "Versek speaks truth, Lord," rasped the twisted warrior known to the Chosen as the Sorrow. "Were it me attacking, I would come in force from all sides. With our defences spread thin, even we cannot hold the Imperial scum forever." "Just so," agreed Zorphus. "But this is no conventional battle. We need only hold the foe until my ritual is complete. Their ignorance will be their undoing. They have given us time to deploy the Banshee Stone unopposed. It will shatter the cage." The Chosen turned as an ancient Black Legion stormbird settled nearby in a cloud of dust. Down the craft's ramp came a broad grav platform, the rune-carved dais flanked by acolytes. An energy field rose up from the dais, holding aloft a twisted shard of crystal the size of a boarding torpedo. The stone surface was carved with screaming faces, and energies the colour of a livid bruise pulsed within its depths. Lord Zorphus issued his orders as the Banshee Stone was guided towards the wide, packed earth ramp that descended into the shadowed pit. "Dorsgog, you and your Terminator brethren shall accompany me into the pit. The rest of you, spread yourselves along the perimeter. Put steel in my warriors' spines. Hold the foe back no matter the cost. Bleed them for me." Zorphus's Chosen slammed their fists against their breastplates, then turned away to fulfill his commands. The sorcerer shot a brief glance up at the roiling sky, muttering a prayer to the dark gods. Then he moved to the head of his acolyte's procession and led the way into the pit. Versek hauled himself up onto the sagging balcony of a ruined factorum. From his vantage point, he inspected the southern defences. Below him stretched a thin line of black-armoured warriors, hunkered down amidst the ruins. Havoc sighted their heavy weapons out across the kill zone, watching the rising dust cloud that marked the approaching Imperial forces. Obliterators spat corrupted machine code, flesh metal slithering as they manifested their weapons of choice. Here and there lurked demon engines or Black Legion tanks, all hungered for battle, thought Versek, or thirsted for loyalist blood. The Chosen's auto-senses dimmed suddenly, adjusting to the first vivid flash of the Black Legion orbital bombardment. A lance beam reached down from the clouds, leaving a vivid, cerulean slash across Versek's vision. Fire bloomed where it hit the ground, a roiling explosion that drew roars from the Black Legion warriors. "So begins the slaughter!" bellowed Versek, magnifying his vision to drink in the sight of Blood Angel's tanks reduced to blazing wrecks. The enemies were coming fast, racing armoured transports, speeding bike squadrons, and rumbling tanks. They would soon close the gap. More orbital blasts stabbed downwards, lance beams joined by plummeting barrage bombs that raised great clouds of dust and smoke with each detonation. The ground shook as a rain of fire fell along the horizon, arcing away to the east and west of Versek's position. There were more enemies out there, he knew. The Imperials were attacking from every side at once. His vox crackled with reports of enemy knights and titans, and maniple upon maniple of the Adeptus Mechanicus cyborgs. Versek even caught mention of Cranon the Relentless, a report of the surviving Crimson slaughter racing in from the blazing eastern forests with the Legio Metallica on their tails. "Cowardly dogs!" muttered Versek to himself, then louder, addressing his warriors. "Now is the time! Mighty Black Legionaries, servants of the Despoiler! Let's show these Imperial runts how real warriors fight!" His followers raised another ferocious bellow of approval. The next moment, bursting from the billowing smokescreen of the bombardment, the Blood Angels came racing into battle. Storm Raven gunships streaked overhead, fire stabbing down from their assault cannons to blitz explosions through the traitor lines. At the same time, those Imperial ground units that had survived the gauntlet of the barrage executed their own armoured charge. There were a lot of them, thought Versek with grim relish. Missiles streaked up from the Havocs to his left, drawing lines of fire between their position and the racing Storm Ravens. The nearest of the gunships was pierced by multiple warheads exploding in midair. Another banked hard, only to be hit from the side by a roaring helldrake. The demon engine's talons bit deep, and both aircraft tumbled out of view behind the ruins. The bulk of Versek's warriors rained fire upon the Blood Angel's tanks and bikers. Muzzle flare flickered up and down the line as a hail of bolts, missiles and laser blasts engulfed the loyalists. A red armoured rhino exploded, blazing figures scrambling from within. A Land Raider slewed sideways as its track was severed, booling out in a spray of links and leaving the vehicle stranded. Blood Angel's bikers were punched from their saddles, or had their fuel tanks detonate beneath them. Still, the enemy came on, bellowing the name of Sanguinius, as they spilled from their transports and ran headlong for the traitor line. "Hold them!" roared Versek. His gold chased bolter spitting shells down into the charging foe. He spun a Blood Angel off his feet, blowing their warrior's arm from his shoulder. "Let none pass!" Away to the right, a Black Legion Predator exploded, pierced by multiple lascannon blasts. Its demise shook the balcony on which Versek stood, staggering him for a moment. When the Chosen looked up, a glorious warrior in sculpted red armour had fought his way almost to the base of the Factorum. A captain, by the look of him, power sword swinging as he hacked through a band of Black Legionaries with his command squad at his back. "Time to die, noble angel," hissed Versek. Slinging his bolter and drawing his own blade, the Chosen took 2 steps back, then made a running leap from the balcony and plunged into the fight. All around the perimeter, the Imperial forces hit hard and fast. The devastating orbital bombardment had slackened as Loyalist battleships executed a courageous attack in orbit. The sky filled with the shooting stars of tumbling wreckage as the Black Legion craft broke off and rose to engage their tormentors. On the ground, the Blood Angels and Adeptus Mechanicus pressed forwards in the shadow of towering Imperial war engines. Black Legion fire continued to rain down upon them, blasting tanks to roiling wreckage and annihilating waves of infantry. As the fighting raged, bloody thunderheads loomed above the western plains, racing swiftly closer. They billowed above Kharn and his maelstrom of gore, who rushed back in towards the raging battle. As the betrayer neared the flash and thunder of the war zone, his keen eyes caught movement ahead. Cult Mechanicus forces, electro-priests and servitors retreating in the face of overwhelming Black Legion firepower. Roaring battle cries, Kharn and his warriors crashed into the Metallicans from behind, ripping through them like a bladed whirlwind. Desperate, point-blank firefights erupted as warriors of the Cult Mechanicus tried to stave off the enemies hitting them from both sides. Black Legion fire rained indiscriminately into the fight as berserkers slaughtered and electro-priests blasted and slew. Amidst the slaughter, Kharn caught sight of a looming figure, the magus who led this ill-fated procession. Power stabbed from the machine priest's weapons, blasts of focused plasma burning through the chests and helms of 3 berserkers in quick succession. The next moment, Gorchild's whirling teeth lopped the caliver from its mechadendrite mounting, sweeping on to carve deep into the magus's robed form. Blood and oil spurted. Electrical discharges crackled, and the magus's eye lenses flickered with flaring power. "You cannot kill me," rasped the priest. His voice fuzzed with static. "The Omnisire has not the might of Kharn," interrupted Kharn in a furious roar, before lopping off the magus's head. With one mighty swing, the machine priest's body convulsed, then slumped to the blood-sick ground as his sparkling head rolled into a ditch. There its eye lenses went dark for the last time. Kharn neither knew nor would have cared that with a single axe stroke he had denied the Imperium its best chance to acquire the Demon Cage technology. He knew only that another worthy skull lay now at the feet of Kharn, and that he must add more. Roaring to the blood clouds above, the betrayer ploughed on into warzone carnage, hacking through Metallican and Black Legionary alike in his murderous frenzy. To the south, Versek fought with spite and skill against his Blood Angel opponent. The captain was an expert swordsman, his blade flashing as he cut the air to ring against Versek's guard time and again. Yet the Chosen could see his foe's crippling nobility. The captain fought with restraint, as though caging his true fury behind bars of iron will. "Your mistake," spat the Chosen. convulsing his mutant third lung to unleash a scream that burst blood vessels all across his body with its force. The howl slammed forward like a hammer blow, knocking the captain from his feet and cracking his armor. Versik raised his blade with a roar and swept it down upon his dazed opponent. His blow was blocked by the golden sword of another Blood Angel, whose combat shield cracked into Versik's helm. "Get back, traitor!" roared the Blood Angel, driving Versik away from the prone captain with a series of swift hacks and cuts. "Your base trickery shall not avail you!" "Oh, it might," snarled the Chosen, opening his jaws and spitting a wad of acid into his enemy's faceplate. Ceramite hissed as it melted. Cursing, the Blood Angel ripped his helm from his head. It was all the opening Versik needed, and his blade stabbed into his enemy's now unarmored face. The molecular field that surrounded the sword parted flesh and bone, and as Versik ripped his weapon free, the Blood Angel collapsed, his head bisected. The Chosen allowed the tides of battle to sweep him back, absorbing the state of the battle. Matters were turning against him. Knots of Black Legionaries still fought, but they were outnumbered by the vengeful Blood Angels overrunning their lines. Ducking back through the hollow Factorum's doorway, he keyed his vox. "This is Versik, on the southern perimeter. The foe have broken through. Wobsmith Octarian, send your demon engines." The response, when it came, was set against a backdrop of fierce gunfire and explosions. "They are here too," grated Wobsmith Octarian. "Teleport strike!" The rasping voice cut out for a moment, and Versik's vox spat static. When the Wobsmith voice returned, it was pained and furious. "They are tearing my engines apart! They have reached the pit! We cannot!" Versik broke the line with a curse. "I must hold them back," he muttered to himself, mind whirling with strategic possibilities. The next second, a figure darkened the empty doorway, and the Chosen turned to find the glowing muzzle of the Blood Angel's captain's plasma pistol. His foe had found him again. "No, traitor," intoned Captain Amthal. "All you must do is die." Plasma flashed, and Versik's world vanished in white fire. The Doom of Amthal. The Banshee Stone screamed, and the world screamed with it. Set into the cracked bedrock at the base of the pit, the crystal pulsed and writhed. Blood welled from the rocky ground and gushed from the earthen walls, flowing from the anointed soil in crimson streams. The Banshee Stone drank it in. Suffused with sacrificial might, it howled with this harmonic power. The ground shook. Cracks spread. Beneath the ground, the cacophonous resonance reached the shell of the demon cage and broke its wards one by one. Lord Zorphus threw his arms wide, ears and eyes bleeding from the pandemonic din. A powerful sense of destiny gripped him. This was victory. He knew it. His moment was at hand. "Lord," the hissing voice of the warrior known as the Sorrow cut through his triumph, barely audible in his vox. "Defenses are collapsing to the south and east. Their titans have annihilated our armor. There is nothing more we can do to slow them. The angels will soon breach the pit." "Understood," barked Lord Zorphus, before switching his vox to address the surviving Black Legionaries fighting above. "It is done," he boomed. "You have served the despoiler well. Now, fall back. Let them have this doomed world." With that, Zorphus spun and set out across the shuddering floor of the pit. He moved swiftly, his acolytes and lumbering Terminator bodyguards keeping pace. The traitors dodged around dead servitor excavators and rode out the planet's convulsions, the Banshee Stone pulsing ever brighter behind them. Several of Zorphus's entourage were lost as the ground opened to swallow them. Ignoring their fate, the sorcerer and his followers strode onto the earth ramp that wound up the pit's flank. High above, they could see the sky, billowing with bloody storm clouds. With every pace, it grew closer. They were almost at the top of the ramp when the Blood Angels blocked their path. Zorphus saw red-armored Terminators led by a roaring warrior with a bionic eye and an ornate thunderhammer. Behind him came veteran and golden sanguinary guard. Bolters flashed and roared as the Blood Angels and Black Legion opened fire upon one another. Zorphus threw up a warding sigil, conjuring a shield of power from which the enemy fire rebounded. With a contemptuous snarl, the sorcerer drew upon the powers of the warp and tore the ground out from under his enemy's feet. A thumping series of tectonic detonations raced up the ramp, hurling several angels into the pit. Zorphus was not done. Roaring with triumphant fury, the sorcerer channeled the rampant energies of the Banshee Stone itself, sealing a portion of its hideous disharmony. The power leapt out as bolts of crackling black lightning and ripped a massive chunk of rock from the pit wall. The blood angels staggered as the avalanche slammed down on them, burying many in rubble. Those who could still do so continued to fire, punching several more black legionaries from their feet. "Forwards!" snarled Zorphus, leading his warriors up the ramp and through the midst of their half-buried foes. He wove aside from the furious swipe of a chain fist, noting with alarm that the enemy terminators were already ripping themselves free. More blood angels were closing in from the south, and off to the east, loyalist titans loomed. "Stygian beast!" he voxed. "Do you have teleporter lock?" "Aye, Lord," crackled the response from on high. "Your sigils and wards are holding. The machine spirits have your blood scent, and that of the betrayer." For a single slow second, Lord Zorphus watched the ornate thunderhammer of the blood angel's leader sweeping towards his face, ploughing through the gathering energies of a teleport flare. Then, with a hollow bang, Zorphus and his followers vanished from the surface of Amthal, snatched away by a teleportarium modified by spells of Zorphus's own cunning creation. Kharn fought amidst a crimson haze. Victims swam into focus, then gone again as his axe took their lives. He hewed down the sons of Sanguinius and Horus alike, claiming their skulls and spilling their blood for the only master who truly mattered. The betrayer leapt aside as the land raider roared past, its spiked ram stirring a memory of an ancient wounding, terrible agony in his chest. Kharn shook the memory off and plunged into a mass of Scitarii, hewing them like firewood. As the last of the cyborgs fell, Kharn registered dropcraft dusting off around him, lumbering into the skies with their guns blazing. Weaklings, he thought. Fleeing before the butchery was done, he and his berserkers would not display such cowardice. Yet, even as he formed that thought, the betrayer saw wisps of ethereal energy twining about his limbs. His runes of Khorne blazed, overwhelmed by sorcerous powers. What? Colors whirled, gravity surged and vanished. The ensorcelled teleport plucked Karl from Amthal and dumped him unceremoniously into the armored hold of a spaceship. Kharn's senses reeled from the sudden transition, the energies of the warp leaving his thoughts momentarily sluggish and confused. He took in voices, dark magi hissing that they had followed the orders of the despoiler himself, that Kharn had been saved from certain and wasteful death through Lord Zorphus's vile sorcerer's ritual, that he should be grateful to be singled out for rescue when so many had been left to die. Their prating needled his mind like the butcher's nails, and Kharn felt his fury rising. He had been snatched from glorious battle, had been forced to leave the faithful of Khorne to their holy end, as if he were some slave of Abaddon's to be borne away at will. Gorchild revved in Kharn's fist, and the Magi had just enough time to shriek in panic before he came for their heads. Elsewhere, amidst the madness of war-zone carnage, Crannon swang his monstrous blade, cleaving a blood angel in two. The bloodied halves of his foe flopped to the floor, and Crannon leapt over them. To his left, Drasnicht and the last of the Ravagers hacked and tore, cursed and blasted. To his right, the hell-brute Hakorath led the ragtag remains of Crannon's Terminators and Chaos Space Marines across the rubble, guns roaring. The last of the Warband's tanks lay blazing somewhere in their wake, reduced to scrap by the guns of the Imperial Titans. But the Crimson Slaughter would get off this hellish world alive. They would return to the lost hope and rebuild. Crannon was utterly determined. The war zone was total bedlam, with traitors and loyalist armies tangled together and fighting with wild fury. Tanks roared through walls and blazed point-blank fire into masses of enemy warriors, only to be blown apart by their foes in return. Khorn berserkers were attacking everything in sight, wreaking indiscriminate carnage. The knots of cultists screamed out prayers to the dark gods as they were surrounded and gunned down by the vengeful loyalists. Over the madness came a soaring wail, raising from the pit nearby and causing the ground to shudder and crack in time with its nerve-shredding screams. All around, Black Legionaries were staging fighting retreats towards their last remaining transports. It was towards the nearest of these that Crannon now drove, cutting down anything that got in his way. "The Amthal voices," snarled Drasnik. "They're getting louder again. It's this damn place." "You're right," growled Crannon, watching as emerald flames began to crawl along his limbs. "But it's different now." He grunted in exertion as he lopped the head from a Black Legion warrior who had lunged into his path. "Before they wanted us, needed us as vessels for their will. Now it's just overspill. Whatever Zorphus has done, he's brought the demons so close to the surface that they don't need us anymore. They'll be free soon enough." Ahead, Black Legionaries were piling aboard a traitor Thunderhawk, the aircraft's guns blazing as they staved off the Scitarii closing in from both sides. "That," snarled Crannon, raising his blade, "is ours." The leader of the Crimson Slaughter led the charge, pounding headlong towards the ramp. The handful of Black Legionaries turned on the boarding ramp, and the guns came up without a second's hesitation. Several bolt rounds slammed against Crannon's armor as he charged, and more than one of the Crimson Slaughter fell to Black Legion gunfire. Then the Chaos Lord was up the ramp and into his foes, the Ravagers close on his heels. Powered blades and crackling maces swung, armor crumpled and bones shattered. Bolters boomed in the confined hold, blowing red-armored warriors back down the ramp like rag dolls. Still, the Crimson Slaughter processed forwards, hacking and hewing at the frantic Black Legion, backing them into the Thunderhawk's hold and massacring them like cornered rats. The last fighting ended when Hakareth lumbered aboard. A single desperate Black Legionary made a dash for the ramp, but the Hellbrute caught him around the head with its massive fist and crushed his skull like an egg. Crannon looked around. Barely 15 warriors were left standing from a force of several hundred, without counting the thousands of cultists slain. He had lost a lot of warriors on this world. It would take time to rebuild, and once he did, Lord Zorphus would have a great deal to answer for. But that was another day. For now, they just had to live. "Das nicht," he growled. "Take 2 of your men and persuade the pilots that we are leaving now." The champion nodded his horned helm, then disappeared towards the cockpit with a pair of the Ravagers at his heels. Meanwhile, the surviving Crimson Slaughter warriors drew up at the top of the ramp and coldly gunned down anything that moved into their field of fire. A few moments later, the assault ramp rose with a welcome whine of servos, sealing the Crimson Slaughter inside. Crannon felt the crass engines engage. Then the Thunderhawk was rising, turning, and leaping forwards as Drasnik hit the jets hard. Crannon hung on to a hand grip as the Thunderhawk burned for the upper atmosphere with enemy fire ringing from its hull. As they rose away from war-zone carnage, he felt the pressure of the exalted demons' voices easing in his mind, until at last they vanished altogether. Blessed silence fell, and the Lord of the Crimson Slaughter released a slow breath before wrenching off his helm and barking a weary laugh. Ha! The voices would return. Of that he had no doubt. Not those of Amthal, but of the twisted entities that had haunted the Crimson Slaughter for so long. But for now, Crannon's mind was his own, and while he could think, he was getting his followers out of here. "Scimitar!" voxed Crannon. "Lock our Terminators, teleport homers, and move to rendezvous. We're in a stolen Thunderhawk. Vorlak, don't shoot us down. Have the other craft muster on you, and be ready to fight if you have to. I don't care what the mighty Abaddon commands. We are done with this place, and we are leaving." The fire was huge, a roaring conjunction of green and yellow flame that danced upon a bed of blackened wraithbone. It filled the echoing warp chamber with diseased illumination, and threw twisted shadows that cavorted across the walls and ceiling. Abaddon stood before the demon pyre, brows drawn down as he watched the images swimming within its depths. He watched as the Daemor system burned, as eyeline fell. He watched the ebb and flow of battle across Amthal's surface. Victorious champions swam into sight, roaring battle cries, only to be replaced moments later by the ash and bones of the slain. Abaddon watched it all play out, a tale of angels and traitors told in the fires of the warp itself. Finally, he saw the Banshee Stone, shuddering and screaming in cacophonous fury until, at last, the librarians of the Blood Angels shattered it with the power of their minds. "Too late," hissed a ghostly voice in his ears. "They were too late to stop it." "Then it is only a matter of time," rumbled Abaddon, his deep voice echoing across the twisted chamber. "Yeah," came the whispers. "The ritual is complete. The cracks are spreading, and the wards are dying." "You have done well, Lord Zorphus," murmured Abaddon. The flames crackled and jumped. Shadows danced and whirled. Then the whispers came again. "We have hidden ourselves from loyalist eyes amidst the zircon sprawl. We continue the rites that the stone began. The cracks widen. We watch. We wait." Abaddon nodded to himself, a slow gesture of satisfaction. "Do so," he replied. "Complete this task, and upon my return, you shall have such rewards as loyal service brings." Abaddon turned away as the pyre died back and strode to the armor-glass viewport set into the chamber's outer wall. He looked out from one of the planet killer's many baroque spires towards the approaching fringe of the Eye of Terror. Real space blurred with the outspilled corruption of the warp, creating great clouds and flickering borealis of kaleidoscopic energies that Abaddon's flagship dived into without pause. This was but the fringe, thought the despoiler, just the leading edge of the twisted realm within which he had forged his vast armada. Now, he must go deeper than ever before, leaving his lackeys to win his battles, while he grasped the power to win the entire war. That power would be his, thought the despoiler, unconsciously clenching his fists. He had fought too long and too hard for it to be otherwise. He would entertain no other outcome. At last, the hour of victory was at hand. The corpse emperor would burn upon his broken throne. With that last thought, Abaddon plunged deeper into the Eye of Terror and left the savage battles of the 13th Black Crusade blazing on in his wake. Breaking the Cage. The final battle for the Daemor system would be fought around the blood-anointed environs of Warzone Carnage. It was only one of the savage conflicts raging throughout the system, but the others were mere distractions. Lord Zorphus had eyes for this battle alone. Here lay the despoiler's prize, and the Black Legion threw everything they had into claiming it. In the wake of the attack by Kharn's butcher horde, Lord Zorphus met with his first true setback. Every action changes the weave of fate. Unlike the skilled seers of the Eldar, those chaos worshippers who predict the future do so by interpreting the whispered half-truths of demons. Around Amthal, the screams and threats, beguilements and imprecations of the caged demons filled the ether. Under such conditions, even the most skilled oracle could discern nothing of fate. Zorphus's third eye was blinded, and though he had laid his plans as best he could, the Blood Angels diverged from the path he had set them. Led by First Captain Kharn, an elite force of Blood Angels veterans and Sanguinary Guard had launched a blistering strike against the Hex Infernium that fed Eyeline's demon engine factories. It was an audacious move. Fierce fighting had raged through the streets around the Hex Infernium, the Blood Angels' element of surprise carrying them only so far before the overwhelming numbers of the Chaos Forces began to tell. Yet just as a rampaging Lord of Skulls looked set to crush the attackers, the Sanguinor struck from the heavens. Inspired by the Angel of Sanguinius, the surviving Blood Angels succeeded in destroying one of the biochemical warding towers that stopped the energies of the rift from rampaging out of control. Mayhem ensued as the demonic maelstrom broke its bounds and devoured the factories it was meant to feed. Kharn and his raiders escaped aboard Stormraven gunships, even as the Hex Infernium detonated into a roiling wave of warp energies that annihilated all life on the planet. The loss of Arline was a major blow for the Black Legion. Lord Zorphus's ritual teetered upon the brink of completion. To fail now would invite hideous consequences. He had hoped to shed more blood upon the thirsty soil, but the Blood Angels had forced his hand. At the head of the Black Legion invasion fleet, the sorcerer led the final attack on Amthal. The Black Legion fleet was not vast, certainly not large enough to bolster all of the faltering traitor battlements on Amthal. Imperial Strategos had concluded that either their enemy was hesitantly frittering his forces away piecemeal, or the heretics were playing some other game, the rules to which the Imperial forces were not privy. It was this second scenario that filled Lord Admiral Gordas with dread, and led him to order all remaining ships and planetary defense levies on Tormalid to stand ready. Wherever the Black Legion struck, Gordas would throw the last of his might into helping his allies stop them. Gordas's devotion was admirable, but Lord Zorphus's cunning and prescience would be the governor's undoing. It began over Peridos. The Black Legion cruisers emerged from hiding, surging from the Zircon sprawl in an all-out attack against the Imperial naval cordon. It would be a desperate battle for the outnumbered traitors, but one in which they might win great glory. More importantly, from Zorphus's point of view, it would ensure that no reinforcements were available to defend Amthal. Meanwhile, a lone traitor battleship settled in the void just outside the range of Tormalid's orbital guns. This was the Cagademon, craft of the word-bearer Gorath Hell. The Dark Apostle had business with the capital world and its vital dockyards. He would ensure that no aid for Amthal came from that quarter. With the board set, Lord Zorphus moved all of his pieces in for the final blow. His fleet thundered down upon Amthal, gathering up the scattered remnants of the Crimson Slaughter and Khornate warships as it went. The Blood Angels and Fleet Mechanicus flotilla fought bravely to hold back the tide, but they faced a fleet fresh and undamaged by the fighting thus far. After the strike cruiser Flame of Baal was torn in half by sustained torpedo bombardment, and 2 Mechanicum explorator ships were reduced to drifting wreckage, the remaining Imperial craft fell back. With the skies clear, the Chaos Planetfall began. Their objective was the gate of the primordial demon cage. Thanks to the Crimson Slaughter, Lord Zorphus knew where the cage's wards were weakest, and where its inmates' power could leak out. The Black Legion brought with them a mighty weapon, a disharmonic crystal torn from the throne room of a Slaaneshi demon prince who had foolishly thought to oppose Abaddon. Known as the Banshee Stone, this monstrous artifact would form the focus of a ritual to shatter the bars of the demon cage. Every drop of blood shed around Warzone carnage, every day of seemingly senseless and wasteful battle, had served to prepare the way for this dread weapon. It had been sacrificial magic on a global scale, and Lord Zorphus held the knife. The ground had been anointed, the way prepared. Drinking deep the blood of the slain, the Banshee Stone would unleash its discordant fury to burn out the wards of the demon cage where they were weakest. The vast prison would crack wide open, and billions of warp entities would be set loose all at once. Such an incredible surge of empiric energy would be more than reality could bear. The Diamor system would pull open like a hideous wound, causing a new-formed warp rift to billow forth in its place. Abaddon's crimson path would leap suddenly forwards, a fault line in reality ripping from Cadia to Diamor, and on towards Terra. It was a diabolical masterstroke, and one that, if successful, would hasten Abaddon's war by months, perhaps even years. The last stage of this grand ritual would be performed in the deep pit at the very heart of Warzone carnage. This would take time, and the Black Legion had learned well the lessons of Pandarax. Zorphus and his cabal landed upon the very lip of the dig site, accompanied by a force of Black Legion Terminators, battle tanks, and demon engines. It was here that Lord Zorphus met with his second surprise of the campaign. His forces fell upon Warzone Carnage, unopposed. The sorcerer knew that his enemies must, by now, have realized his objective, if not his purpose. They were no fools. No, reasoned Zorphus. If his enemies were not present, then they could not be far away, probably massing for a decisive blow. In this, they had miscalculated. But he must still move quickly to exploit their error. On Zorphus's orders, dropcraft after dropcraft landed around the dig site, disgorging traitor warriors and war engines. They were to delay the enemy for as long as they could, at any cost. Renegade knights and cornate chitons strode into position alongside the surviving engines of the Legio Excruciatus, their massive guns tracking the war-blasted approaches to the ritual site. Flights of Helldrakes soared through the local airspace like dragons defending their horde. Overhead, spacecraft settled into low orbit. Their bulk darkened the skies as their macro cannons and lance batteries were readied. As he descended into the pit with his cabal to begin the ritual, Lord Zorphus felt the hand of Tzeentch heavy upon his shoulder. He would change the galaxy here, if his followers could hold out long enough. When the Imperial attack came, it was expertly coordinated. Massed maniples of Scitarii advanced on every front. Onager dune crawlers stalked in their midst as Iron Striders loped out ahead. Chanting masses of electro-priests marched to battle with tracked battle servitors and towering robots looming over them. From the north came the remaining warriors of House Raven, many of their knights exhibiting hastily repaired battle damage, but still flying their colors with pride. From the east came the engines of the Legio Metallica, the boom of their war horns echoing across the blasted landscape. Finally, from the south came the forces of the Blood Angels, direct from the pacification of Warzone cruelty. The warriors of the Second Company were much in evidence, rumbling transports raising dust trails in their wake as they sped towards the battle. Overhead skimmed Storm Raven gunships, bearing veteran assault troops and the last remnants of the Death Company on Amthal. The Imperial noose drew tighter around the traitor forces before, with a rumble like thunder and a fire that lit the skies. The Chaos spacecraft began their bombardment. It was a reversal of the initial Chaos attack upon Amthal, but writ upon an even larger scale. The Imperial forces hurtled towards the thin black line of their foes, daring the barrage fire of the battleships above to close with the Black Legion defenders. Guns in their thousands lit with muzzle flare as both sides opened fire, and explosions wreathed the battle lines as the Imperial forces pushed home their attack against Lord Zorphus's outer defences. Even though many of those who fought did not truly understand what was at stake, or sensed that the deciding moment of this savage war was upon them. As the enemy closed the gap, the Chaos forces hammered them with everything they had. Havocs and obliterators blazed away with screams of hatred upon their lips. In a daring move, the surviving Imperial spacecraft launched harassing strikes against the Black Legion fleet. The beset Black Legion captains were forced to choose between remaining vulnerable in low orbit or breaking off their bombardment to rise out of the atmospheric envelope and engage the Imperial fleets. Spike-studded warships rumbled up to punish the Loyalists with lance and torpedo fire. As they did so, the bombardment of the surface slackened by the moment. Blood Angel Terminators, just returned from the Ireline raid, teleported into the midst of the Chaos lines on the southern edge of the dig site, their swift strike allowing them to cripple a huge Hellforge warpack waiting in reserve. Against this weakened portion of the lines fell a massed strike of Blood Angels and Scitarii under the leadership of 2nd Company Captain Aphael. Zorphus's most trusted lieutenants led the counterattack, but the hated Loyalist had come in such force that victory was impossible, even for the elite of the Black Legion. At the same time, The outnumbered titans of the Legio Excruciatus found themselves facing an uneven duel to the east, pushed back step by step by the triumphant Legio Metallica. Though their ferocious firepower had felled many knights to the north and driven back the cult mechanicus possessions, attacking from the west, to the south and the east, the Black Legion defences were buckling. At this point, the ritual at the base of the dig site pit was well underway. The Banshee Stone had been lowered into position at the very heart of the pit, the blood of countless fallen welling up from the rocky ground and pouring in red rivers from the excavation walls as the stone drank it in. With the monstrous artifact pulsing the colour of a livid bruise, an awful disharmonic cacophony had begun. A moaning, soaring, screaming note that drowned out the chanting of Zorphus and his acolytes. Those energies were flowing down into the planet, shuddering through strata of soil and bedrock to where the extraplanar shell of the demon cage thrummed with primordial power. Already, cracks were forming in that ancient device, spreading slowly through its millennium-old wards and extinguishing them one by one. Everything hung in the balance, from the space battle occurring on high to the dueling forces that fought across the ruins of Warzone carnage, down to the fate of the planet, the system, and perhaps even the Imperium itself. That was when Kharn returned to the battle, drawn from the burning plains to the west by the sounds of so vast a conflict. The betrayer led a massed maelstrom of gore against Magos Dominus Infastophon and his cult mechanicus forces, retreating in the opposite direction. What followed was a swift, brutal battle. Although his procession put up a fierce fight to defend their master, the Magos's head was struck from his shoulders and his followers butchered to the last. As Kharn rampaged on across the battlefield to slaughter traitor and loyalist alike, he left the Imperium's hopes of replicating the demon cage technology bloodied in the dust behind him. Meanwhile, the situation to the south had become critical. Led by some of the Blood Angel's greatest heroes, a red armoured spear tip had driven through the Chaos defensive lines and met at the very lip of the pit. Cicatrix Maledictum were funneling through the gap, while several engines of the Legio Metallica were laying down a steady bombardment from the east to drive the traitor forces away from the breach. Though the ritual was not yet complete, Lord Zorphus realized that he was out of time. This would not be another Pandarax, however. The Banshee Stone had reached a terrible pitch of disharmony, and a massive damage had been wrought upon the wards that held the demon cage closed. It might not rupture today, but it would not last long. Let the Imperial fools think that they had stopped this ritual in time. Zorphus knew better. With a booming psychic command, the sorcerer ordered the retreat, abandoning the Banshee Stone to run on for as long as it could. Zorphus and his cabal stormed up the rampart that led out of the pit. Accompanied by black-armoured terminators, the sorcerer and his acolytes unleashed the full fury of their psychic might to drive back the Blood Angels who rushed to meet them. With breathing space secured and a clear teleport lock established, the Black Legion were whisked away in a blaze of warp light, leaving their foes raging in their wake. Everywhere else, furious battle devolved into anarchy as the traitor warbands fell back to whatever craft could carry them. The elite of the Black Legion staged skillful fighting retreats, falling back in good order and lifting off with all guns blazing. Others, like Crannon the Relentless and his handful of surviving Crimson Slaughter followers, simply bludgeoned a path to safety, slaughtering friend and foe alike in order to claim a traitor Thunderhawk and escape. On the northern edge of the battle, the last of the Legio Excruciatus made it aboard their monumental landing craft, only for the Knights of House Raven to shoot out its portside thrusters. The enormous ship tilted sideways as it attempted to lift off, thundering down in a lazy arc to birth a new sun on the plains to the north. The rest of the Chaos hordes, the cultist chaff and murder-mad berserkers, were abandoned to the vengeful guns of the Imperial troops. The only exception was Kharn. Lost to the joy of slaughter, the betrayer had carved a path of carnage through Imperium and Chaos forces alike, and showed no signs of slowing when swirling teleport energies engulfed him. Abaddon still had uses for Kharn, and so Lord Zorphus did his duty in ensuring that the betrayer was not left to die. The blood sigils and ensorcements that Zorphus had wrought around his flagship's teleportarum had cost the sorcerer dear in his own energies and lifeblood. This would be small comfort to those aboard the Hammerfang, the ship onto which Kharn was unceremoniously beamed. The betrayer's murderous rampage would last for days. On the planet's surface, the slaughter continued for many hours before the last of the traitor forces were destroyed. Only by the combined efforts of librarian Asmasael and his psychically attuned brothers was the Banshee Stone cracked and its hideous lament silenced. By that time, the traitor fleet had scattered, making for predetermined retreat coordinates. Only one craft remained, veiled behind skeins of illusion. Lord Zorphus's flagship ghosted its way into the fringes of the Zircon sprawl, and there it powered down all but its most essential systems. It would wait, invisible to all, upon the orders of the despoiler himself. The Imperium would believe that they had won a great victory on Amthal, that they had foiled the despoiler's plans once again. Lord Zorphus and the surviving acolytes of his cabal knew that they were wrong. Here the Chaos Sorcerers would lurk, protected by their bodyguards, and continue the dark ritual of disharmonic unbinding began by the Banshee Stone. Already, the cracks in the demon cage had spread beyond repair, even had anyone living known how to fix them. The energies of the Banshee Stone were no longer needed. Before Lord Zorphus and his followers completed their diabolic task, the bars of the demon cage would break. It was already beginning.